Chapter 21 Lesson. I am 15 chapters ahead on my Patreon, check it out if you are interested. Web links eacute.com/emperordragon. Chapter 21. A Lesson in Pain. Lucas's perspective. I launched myself at Richard with the force and fury of a wild animal unleashed, every muscle coiled like a spring, every nerve alight with instinct. It was pure motion, raw, explosive, unstoppable. My claws were outstretched, sharp and gleaming, my teeth bared in a snarl I barely registered. The wind tore past my ears as I surged forward, the distance between us disappearing in an instant. I lashed out with my left hand, aiming straight for his chest, right over the heart. I meant to rip through him, to end this in a single, decisive blow. But I missed. By a whisper. A breath. A fraction of an inch. Richard leaned just enough, subtle, effortless, and my claw caught nothing but empty air. He moved like mist, like smoke curling away from fire. There was no resistance, no clash of strength. Just absence. And I was already moving too fast, too hard, to stop. Momentum dragged me past him, and before I could even begin to slow myself, I was hurtling toward the back wall of the cabin like a missile. But I didn't freeze. I didn't falter. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I twisted midair, planting one foot against the wooden wall and springing off it like a predator rebounding off stone. My bones felt the shock, but I didn't care. I twisted again, angling myself back toward Richard with a snarl rising in my throat. This time, I didn't think. I surrendered. Let the beast inside me take over, let it flood my limbs, seize control of my senses. No hesitation. No fear. Just the purity of instinct and need. The need to strike. To win. I came at him harder. Faster. Deadlier. My claws sliced the air in a flurry of swipes, my fists struck out in rapid jabs, and my feet moved on their own, spinning, kicking, shifting with wild, precise energy. I was a storm. A blaze. Fire in motion. And still, I couldn't touch him. Not once. Every strike I made passed through where he had been, not where he was. He didn't block me. He didn't counter. He didn't even raise his hands. He simply wasn't there. He moved like wind around a tree, like water around stone, graceful, fluid, untouchable. I was fighting a ghost. Impressive, Richard said, almost lazily, as he slid aside from another slash like he was stepping over a puddle. You've merged your instincts with your body. They're not clashing, they're aligned. You're already beyond most average hunters, Lucas. He spoke without strain, without breathlessness. And then, for the first time, he moved. He struck. A feint toward my head, quick, sharp, meant to distract. My arms shot up automatically, trying to block the blow. But it was a trap. His fist slammed into my stomach with terrifying force. No warning. No hesitation. Pain exploded through me. It felt like something had caved in. A battering ram of a punch that drove every last breath from my lungs. My knees buckled. My vision fuzzed. My body screamed, but there wasn't even enough air in my chest to cry out. I tried to regroup. To pull myself together. Then his hands came down like thunder. A bone-rattling clap against both sides of my head. Sound vanished. A deafening pop burst inside my skull. My ears rang so loud it felt like knives were digging into my brain. My sense of direction spun. I couldn't hear anything, only that awful, endless ringing. And then came the final strike. His uppercut caught me clean beneath the jaw. My head snapped back. My feet left the ground. I was airborne for a heartbeat, helpless. Then I hit the ground like a dropped puppet. Everything inside me screamed. My gut was wrecked. My jaw throbbed. My ears felt like they were bleeding. I couldn't move. Could barely think. I just lay there, gasping, disoriented, staring up at a painfully blue sky. It was over. I'd lost. He wasn't faster than me. He was smarter. More precise. More experienced. While I relied on power and speed, he relied on understanding. Calculation. Skill. And the worst part. I never stood a chance. Every movement I made, every twitch, every breath, he read me like a book. He anticipated where I would be before I got there. I didn't fight him. He studied me. He knew me. I'd thrown myself at him with everything I had, thinking I could overwhelm him with strength and aggression. And he dismantled me in less than a minute. I wasn't even a threat. He stepped into my field of view, arms crossed over his chest, posture relaxed, gaze clear and steady. There was no mockery in his expression. No arrogance. Just the calm authority of someone who had done this before, many times. Lesson 1, he said, his voice cutting through the haze in my head, sharp even over the ringing in my ears. Strength means nothing if you don't know how to use it. I couldn't nod, couldn't speak, but I heard him. And somewhere, deep beneath the pain, beneath the bruises and the humiliation, the wolf inside me stirred. Not angry, not afraid, but hungry. Hungry for knowledge, for mastery, for power with purpose. Because I'd lost today. Badly. Thoroughly. But it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Chapter 22 Technique. Chapter 22 Technique. Lucas's perspective. Less than a minute. That's all it took for my body to start pulling itself back together. 60 seconds, or maybe less, before the pain began to slip away like a bad dream chased off by daylight. One moment, I was sprawled flat on the ground, gasping like a fish out of water. My ribs felt like they'd folded in on themselves. My ears were still ringing from the impact, a sharp, metallic hum that made it hard to focus. The world tilted, then righted itself, like someone had shaken my snow globe of a skull. But then, like flipping a switch, it all began to fade. The pain ebbed. The pressure in my chest loosened. My limbs stopped trembling. The fog behind my eyes began to lift. My werewolf healing was kicking in, doing what it always did, knitting bones, dulling bruises, soothing torn muscles and battered pride. It was eerie how fast it happened. Like the damage had never been real to begin with, just a passing inconvenience, quickly smoothed over by something ancient and instinctual. I groaned and pushed myself upright, brushing dirt from my jeans. My body didn't feel broken anymore. The soreness had evaporated almost completely, like the heat of it had burned off under an invisible sun. Physically, I was fine. Emotionally, my ego had definitely taken the hit. Okay, I muttered to myself, rolling my neck until I felt a satisfying pop. How the hell do you hit like that? Richard hadn't moved an inch since he knocked me down. Still standing there like a stone monument, arms crossed casually, face unreadable. His expression didn't change as he spoke, cool, unbothered, like knocking me into the dirt hadn't even registered as effort. Strength isn't just about muscle, pup, he said, voice even. It's about everything working in unison. Your bones, your breath, your posture. That's where real power comes from. I frowned, squinting up at him. That sounded like something I'd read in the fortune cookie at the bottom of a takeout bag. Poetic, maybe. But it didn't help me understand what had just happened. Okay, but, I get that in theory, kind of. But that still doesn't explain how you hit like a wrecking ball. He saw the confusion written all over my face and stepped forward, hands going to his hips like he was preparing to explain gravity to someone who still thought the earth was flat. Look, you and I. We've got raw strength. More than enough. The kind that regular humans can't even dream of. That's why they invented techniques. The right way to punch, to stand, to breathe, every little detail matters when you're working with limited resources. It's the way of turning nothing into something. He paused, letting it sink in. Humans don't get to rely on brute force. They don't have claws or healing factors or supernatural endurance. All they've got is what they can train. That's why they learned the proper way to move, to shift their weight, to breathe in rhythm. Every motion becomes intentional. They squeeze every last drop of strength from a body that, by all rights, shouldn't be capable of that kind of force. He held up a hand, fingers splayed. On average, an untrained human only uses maybe 20% of their potential power. That's all they can tap into. But when someone masters proper techniques, when every muscle is in alignment, every breath purposeful, that number can shoot above 90%. That made me pause. 20 to 90%. That wasn't just a difference, it was a canyon. A chasm between what should be possible and what is when someone knows exactly what they're doing. It was the difference between a clumsy slap and a knockout punch. My gaze snapped to Richard, a realization starting to take root. So if someone like us, someone who already has superhuman strength, learns to use those kind of techniques. Richard's smile was cold and sharp, not friendly at all. It was a predator's grin. The kind that came just before the kill. Then you're looking at a truly devastating combination. And just like that, it clicked. Hunters weren't dangerous just because of their enchanted silver weapons or their superhuman strength from the mark. No, they were terrifying because they knew how to fight. Their training made them lethal. Their technique turned them from soldiers into precision instruments of death. The mark enhanced them, yes, but the real danger was in their discipline. Their skill. So every hunter goes through this kind of training, I said, voice low. That's how they survive against creatures that should outmatch them in every way. Richard nodded once. Without actual skills, the mark is just borrowed strength. No foundation. It collapses under real pressure. I took a breath, then straightened my shoulders. Then that's what I need to learn. Not just how to hit harder, but how to hit right. Richard raised an eyebrow at that. You think it's that easy? No, I said. But it's something I can work for. Something I can earn. If I want to fight beside you, if I want to pull my weight on hunts, I have to master this. No shortcuts. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying me. Then he sighed, a deep, resigned sound, the kind that said he knew arguing with me would be pointless. Pup, he said, his tone flat but not unkind. Mastering these skills isn't like picking up a new hobby. It's control, over everything. Your feet, your breath, your center of gravity, your instincts. It's drilling the same movement over and over again until it's part of your bones. And even then, most hunters, after years of training, can barely tap into 50% of their true strength. I met his gaze, unwavering. But I'm not most hunters. That earned me a dry chuckle. No, you're definitely not. And for a moment, just a moment, he looked at me differently. Not like I was a kid tagging along. But like someone who might actually belong in his world. Someone who could carry the weight of it. He sighed again, rubbing a hand over his jaw. All right. But I'm warning you, this isn't going to be fun. I'm not a gentle teacher. I'm harsh. I don't sugarcoat. And I don't tolerate laziness or mistakes. Good, I said, voice steady. Because I don't plan on making any. He snorted. You will. Over and over again. And I'll make sure you learn from every single one. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I stared him in the eyes and made a silent promise. Let the pain come. Let the bruises bloom and the frustration mount. Let the drills wear me down to nothing and then build me back up again. If that was what it took to stand beside Richard, really stand beside him, I'd do it. I had to. And I would. No matter how long it took. Chapter 23 Chained. Chapter 23. Chained. Lucas's perspective. The morning air was thick with anticipation, the ground beneath my feet still damp from the dew, and my whole body buzzed with restless energy. It was like static under my skin, residual charge from what was to come. Muscles coiled, heart steady but elevated, eyes sharp. I was ready. Ready to train. Ready to begin the next chapter of whatever this was becoming. But just as I braced myself, feet spreading instinctively for a fight, Richard raised a hand and brought everything to a halt. That's enough for now, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. First, we eat. I stared at him, blinking once. Eat. He fixed me with that look, half exasperation, half amusement. Training on an empty stomach. That's how you end up puking on your shoes before you even break a sweat. Come on. With a small sigh, I let the tension drain from my limbs and followed him inside. The kitchen was warm, filled with the quiet, comforting smells of breakfast. Emily had already laid everything out on the table as if she knew exactly when we'd walk in. Scrambled eggs steamed on a large plate, golden and fluffy. Thick slices of toast, butter melting into every ridge, were stacked beside a large bowl of sausage links. A dish of fresh fruit sat at the center, grapes, apple slices, strawberries, all perfectly arranged. She didn't even glance up at us, her attention focused on slowly stirring her tea, as if we were merely stepping into a scene she'd already written. We took our seats, me on one side, Richard across from me, Emily at the head. No one said anything at first. The only sounds were the soft clinks of cutlery, the rustle of napkins, and the distant birdsong filtering in through the open window. It was a quiet moment. Almost fragile in how ordinary it felt. The kind of moment you don't know you'll remember until much, much later. Sunlight streamed through the panes, casting long beams that turned the dust in the air into drifting stars. Everything was still, peaceful, real. And then Emily spoke, calmly, almost casually, as if commenting on the weather. Even though Richard acts like a fool half the time, she said between bites of toast, he's probably one of the best hunters this world has ever seen. Richard raised a brow and smirked, but he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. No false humility. No bragging. Just quiet acceptance. I glanced at him. The lack of denial was telling. Emily kept her eyes on her tea. I'd rather you not go charging into dangerous situations at all, she continued, her voice dropping in volume but gaining in weight. But I know you. You'll do it anyway. So if you're going to ignore me, and you will, then at least you're learning from someone who's survived things that should have killed him. She set down her cup and turned to look at me, her expression unusually serious. It was one of those rare moments where her walls dropped just enough to show what was really underneath. worry, pride, fear, and something else. Something close to love. Learn everything you can from him, Lucas, she said. Before that old coot finally keels over. Richard gave a muffled laugh through a mouthful of sausage. Touching, really. But I didn't laugh. I nodded. When Emily spoke like that, you listened. She didn't waste words. If she said something mattered, it did. Breakfast ended the way meals often do, dishes clattered, silverware scraped, tea cooled. The scent of herbs and sugar lingered faintly in the air like a memory. Then, without needing to say it, Richard and I got up and headed back outside. The sun had climbed higher by now. The early morning chill had burned off, replaced by the creeping warmth of midday. The backyard clearing, surrounded by trees and ringed in shade, now felt like an arena, our training ground. Richard turned to me and tossed something. I caught it easily. A silver chain, its links fine but strong, and at its center, a small crystal that shimmered blue in the light. It was cool in my palm, humming softly, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. You know about sigils, right? Richard asked, hands resting on his hips. I nodded. Hunters use them for all sorts of things. Enhancing weapons, creating traps, building barriers, sealing corrupted beings. He gave a satisfied nod. Good. That crystal has a sigil etched into it. Wear it. I hesitated for only a moment before slipping the chain over my neck. The crystal settled against my chest, right over the sternum, and immediately I felt it. The soft pulse, the cold hum, the faint glow. Now give it a drop of blood, Richard said. I didn't hesitate. Extending a claw from my index finger, I nicked my palm just deep enough for a bead of blood to well up. I let it fall onto the crystal. The reaction was instant. The drop disappeared the moment it touched the surface, sucked in like water into dry soil. The crystal flared bright, casting a quick pulse of blue light, then faded to a steady, dim glow. And everything inside me shifted. It was as if someone had turned a dial and muted my core. My strength didn't vanish, but it dulled, noticeably. My muscles felt lighter, weaker. The beast within, always humming with presence, was suddenly distant. Caged. My breath caught in my throat. What is this? Richard crossed his arms. That, he said, is a suppression sigil. It's what we use to restrain corrupted creatures, make sure they can't tap into their strength. You're still a werewolf, but right now, you're barely stronger than an average human. I stared down at the crystal. It felt like a collar. A leash. I hated it immediately. Why? I asked, my voice flat, low. Richard stepped closer. Because you can't learn to fight like a human if you don't understand what it feels like to be one. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because he was right. Deep down, I knew it. You're going to wear that chain, Richard said, until you've mastered every single technique I teach you. No shortcuts. No crutches. Just discipline. I clenched my fist. The chain didn't burn, but it weighed on me all the same. Still, I nodded. All right. Richard's lips curled into something close to a smile, not smug. Just satisfied. Good. Let's begin. First lesson, footwork. And just like that, we started. No claws to dig in. No unnatural strength to lean on. No blur of speed to correct a misstep. Just me, the ground beneath my feet, and Richard's voice guiding every movement. He drilled the fundamentals into me, how to shift my weight, how to pivot without overextending, how to keep my center balanced and grounded. Every detail mattered. Where to place my heels, how to breathe, when to move and when to wait. You're not a wild animal, Richard said, circling me like a hawk. You're not a monster. You're a blade. You're a weapon. Start acting like it. So I did. I repeated the steps. Then again. And again. My muscles burned until the healing kicked in. Sweat trickled down my spine. The sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving. The chain at my neck pulsed with quiet restraint, a reminder with every heartbeat that I was less than I had been. But that didn't stop me. Under the sun, beneath the watchful eye of a man who had seen more battles than I could imagine, I trained. The wolf inside me growled at the boundaries, at the leash. It howled for release. But I didn't take the chain off. Not yet. Chapter 24 2 years. Chapter 24, 2 years bound. Lucas's perspective. 2 years. 730 days. 17,520 hours. Over 1,000,000 minutes of restraint. Of deliberate stillness. Of pushing against the limits of a body that used to be limitless. That's how long I wore the chain. From the moment I clasped it around my neck, I never once removed it. Not to sleep. Not to bathe. Not to train. Not even to breathe easier. It was always there, Cold at first, then warm with time and sweat, pressed against my skin like a shackle I chose to keep on. The crystal embedded in it had once pulsed with energy, a brilliant blue like lightning captured in glass. Now, it had dulled, dimmed to a faint, tired glow, a reflection, maybe, of how I felt those first few months. Exhausted. Ground down. Frustrated beyond belief. It was crafted to keep my strength in check. And it worked. It dampened everything that made me what I was. Every ounce of muscle memory, instinct, and raw power that defined me as a werewolf, it was sealed behind that little stone. In the beginning, it felt like I was drowning in my own body. I would reach for something, heavy, cumbersome, and expect to lift it with ease, only to strain and falter. I'd try to dodge an incoming strike, only to move a few split seconds too slow. My reactions lagged. My body felt foreign. Like a machine that was falling apart from the inside out. It was humiliating in ways I hadn't thought possible. Before the chain, I had spent years honing myself, body and mind. I had trained to be in sync with the wolf inside me. Learned to sift through the chaos of heightened senses, to distinguish the scent of a rabbit from a fox from a person. I could fight with precision, tear through obstacles without second-guessing my strength, react to danger faster than a human blinked. I had learned control. But all that control meant nothing when the very source of it was taken away. Stripped of my strength, speed, and feral instincts, I wasn't human, not really, but I wasn't a proper wolf anymore either. I was something in between. Something unfinished. And Richard made sure I stayed in that limbo. He didn't ease me into it. There were no shortcuts, no soft encouragements. He threw me in the deep end with the kind of training I thought I'd outgrown years ago, and then made it even harder. No weapons training, because I used to rely on claws and teeth. No scent tracking drills, because he knew I could smell prey for miles. None of the comforts I used to take for granted. Instead, he gave me the human experience, raw, unforgiving, and relentless. Footwork drills until my ankles throbbed and my balance broke down. Breathing exercises while pushing my body to the brink. Endless repetition, punch, reset, again. Movement so mechanical, it seeped into my dreams. He didn't just train me to fight without power, he taught me to survive without it. How to stand your ground with a collapsed lung. How to remain perfectly still, even when your instincts are screaming to move. How to let fear sharpen your edge instead of dulling it. And it wasn't just physical. Every week came with new challenges designed to break me in different ways. There were nights where I was blindfolded and left alone in the forest, expected to find my way back with only my wits and half-muted senses. Days spent tracking false trails through freezing rain. Surprise attacks mid-training, sometimes mid-sleep. Mind games. Pressure tests. Moments where I didn't know what was real and what was Richard's doing. He never gave praise. Never offered comfort. Never once said, "Good job." But he never let me quit, either. He broke me down. Rebuilt me. Again and again. Until, eventually, I adapted. Until the chain wasn't just a burden, it became a part of me. By the end of that second year, I didn't even notice it anymore. The weight of it against my chest felt natural. Normal. Like a second skin. Like armor. But now I was finally going to take it off. We stood together in the clearing behind the cabin, the same place where it had all started. The pine trees loomed tall around us, ancient sentinels that had seen every trial I'd endured. The early morning air was sharp and cool, with just the faintest edge of warmth rising beneath it. The sky was still deep with pre-dawn color, and the sun hovered just beyond the treeline, waiting to rise. Richard faced me across the clearing, arms crossed over his chest. He looked the same as ever, broad-shouldered, weathered, sharp-eyed. But there was something different in his expression. The usual steel in his gaze was tempered now, as if behind it was the barest flicker of approval. "It's been 2 years, he said, voice steady, low. You haven't taken that chain off once." I nodded. Not even for a second. He studied me for a beat. His voice wasn't testing or sarcastic when he asked, "Why?" I didn't hesitate. I met his eyes and answered simply, honestly. "Because you told me I'd never master this unless I understood what it meant to be human. So I made sure I did. I didn't want shortcuts. I wanted to earn it." Silence followed. Long. Heavy. Then Richard gave a single nod. "All right, pup," he said quietly. "Let's see if you're ready." He stepped forward. "Take it off." My hands went to the chain. They didn't shake. They didn't pause. The clasp clicked open with a sound that felt like thunder in my ears. And for the first time in 2 long, brutal, transformative years, I pulled the crystal from my chest. The moment it left my skin, the change was instant. Power surged back into me like a dam breaking. My muscles hummed, coiled tight and ready. My vision sharpened. My breath deepened. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet. The wolf stirred in my blood, stretching, grinning, prowling behind my eyes. But I didn't lunge. Didn't snarl. Didn't let it take control. I breathed. In. Out. Grounded. Centered. I was in control. Richard didn't blink. He watched me like a predator, measuring every twitch of muscle, every breath. Let's spar, he said at last. For real this time. A slow smile spread across my face. Not cocky. Not arrogant. Just ready. Bring it on, old man. The chain slipped from my hand, fell into the grass. And the wolf ran free. Chapter 25 Skill. Chapter 25. Skill and Instinct. Lucas's perspective. I drew in a long, slow breath, feeling the air scrape into my lungs like sandpaper. But it wasn't pain, it was presence. My strength didn't come roaring back like thunder. No, it returned like a half-forgotten melody drifting back into focus. A resonance. A whisper of the power that had always been mine, just buried under time. It wasn't a surge, it was a return. A grounding. I became hyper-aware of the soil beneath my feet, each grain pressing into the soles of my boots like tiny anchors. The weight of the air settled on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as something known, something that belonged. My muscles tensed, responsive and alert, a low, electric hum alive beneath my skin. And yet, I didn't flinch. I didn't twitch. No involuntary convulsions. No bone-snapping transformations. No claws. No fangs. And more importantly, no need. There was no need to call on the wolf, no need to shift into the beast that once ruled my every reaction. I wasn't the reckless boy who'd once charged into every fight like a wild animal, all instinct and ferocity, claws flying without form or thought. I had been that boy. But I had grown. 2 years had changed more than my body, they had forged my mind, tempered my will. Now, I understood something deeper. Power wasn't just about strength or savagery. True power lived in precision. In intention. In the way your entire body could become one, every joint, every tendon, every breath moving with purpose. A living weapon not of chaos, but of control. Richard gave a slight nod, wordless, calm, but unmistakable. We stepped forward together, almost in sync. There was no ceremony. No dramatic countdown. No call to begin. We just moved. At first, it was subtle, quiet. Two predators circling, measuring, calculating. Our footwork slow and deliberate, our weight shifting from heel to toe in small, silent motions. Richard was like a statue carved in tension, still, but barely. A breath away from violence. His eyes never left mine, and I mirrored him exactly, body alert, mind clear. My senses sharpened, every scent, every sound, every rustle of the leaves overhead sharpening into clarity. And yet my heartbeat remained steady. He twitched. A feint. I didn't rise to it. I simply adjusted, barely a tilt of my spine. He tested the distance. I circled away. A flick of motion, just enough to provoke. We were reading each other. Each breath was a probe. Each movement, a question. How fast are you now? What have you learned? What did 2 years of pain and growth truly give you? Then, without warning, the fight erupted. He lunged low, fist swinging toward my ribs like a hammer. I twisted away, pivoted my hips, and slammed my elbow toward his side. He absorbed it with a grunt, barely staggered, then caught my wrist and used my momentum like a lever, flipping me with fluid precision. But I wasn't the novice anymore. I adjusted midair, landed on the balls of my feet, twisted, and threw a kick toward his back. He ducked. Quick. He swept at my knee. I blocked with my shin, grounding myself. I drove my fist toward his ribs. He caught it with his forearm and twisted. It wasn't a brawl. It was a dialogue written in strikes and slips, in dodges and grapples. A blur of motion, fluid but fierce. We weren't just fighting, we were speaking to each other in a language only our bodies could understand. I used the terrain. Springing off a low tree trunk, I vaulted over him, spinning in midair, my foot cutting a wide arc toward his temple. He slipped beneath it, came up inside my guard, and kicked my supporting leg. I hit the ground, rolled, sprang up before he could capitalize. He was a machine, but so was I. Every motion felt natural, fluid. My strength wasn't out of control, it was honed. My body now answered my will the way it used to answer instinct. My strikes followed the full chain, from rooted feet, through my core, out to my limbs. I exhaled with each move, letting breath power motion, letting focus guide speed. Richard fought like water trapped under pressure, fluid and explosive. He didn't resist force, he redirected it. He would vanish under a blow, only to reappear behind it, using my strength against me. Around us, the clearing erupted with motion. Dirt kicked up, leaves scattered, branches snapped. The space bore witness to our war, scarred but silent. And still, neither of us made a single mistake. Not yet. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. No one had landed a finishing blow. But sweat poured freely down our faces. Our chests rose and fell in deep, measured gasps. Good, Richard muttered between breaths, his teeth gritted. Damn good. I didn't reply. Couldn't. I was locked in, every ounce of focus narrowed to a fine point. He launched forward again, faster this time. A high feint, but I saw through it. My arms moved before thought, deflecting the strike. I countered, right elbow, left knee, striking in a fluid rhythm. One of my hits connected, hard, driving into his shoulder. He stumbled. Just for a second. I pressed the advantage, launching a combo, knees, elbows, short hooks. He blocked, dodged, absorbed, but I was inside his rhythm now, disrupting it. And then, a wince. Small, quick, but I saw it. For the first time, Richard had felt it. So I surged. Faster. Sharper. Stronger. And I made a mistake. It was tiny. A slight shift in weight. A step too far forward. But for someone like Richard, it was all he needed. He struck like a trap. Left hand snapped up, catching my arm. His foot swept my base. My back slammed into the ground, breath jolting from my lungs. I rolled instinctively, pushing up onto a knee, but he was already on me. His fist arced down. I slipped inside the blow, jabbed toward his ribs, but he caught me again. This time in a clinch. Then, crack, a headbutt. Stars burst behind my eyes. I staggered, disoriented. Tried to pivot out, but he swept my leg mid-turn and slammed me down. Hard. I writhed, tried to buck him off, but he had already pinned me. His knee pressed into my sternum, his hand on my throat. Not squeezing. Just holding. A grip that didn't hurt, but commanded. This wasn't brutality. It was control. It was a statement. It's over. And I knew it. My limbs trembled. My body throbbed. My knuckles were scraped and bleeding. A slow trickle of blood leaked from my nose. And yet, despite all of it, I grinned. Still kicking, I managed, breathless. Richard stared for a second, then released me. He pushed off, offering a hand. Barely, he said, half-smiling. I took his hand. Let him pull me to my feet. You're not ready yet to defeat me, he said, brushing off dirt, his breathing heavy but even. But you're close. Closer than I ever thought you'd get. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Inside me, the wolf didn't snarl. It didn't rage or howl at the loss. It sat still, watching, understanding, and smiling. Because now it knew, this wasn't about rage, or dominance, or who had more brute strength. This was about discipline. About clarity. About command. I had lost. And yet, this defeat tasted like progress. Like the first real step towards something greater. Chapter 26 Final Test. Chapter 26. The Final Test. Lucas's perspective. A few months later. I didn't pack much, just what I thought I might actually need, and even that felt like too much. A clean shirt, folded twice and pressed flat to save space. A handful of high-calorie protein bars for energy. A few vials of crushed herbs, medicinal, mostly, that Emily had practically stuffed into my hands before I could argue. I didn't question her. She always knew what I'd need before I did. And then there was the knife. It wasn't necessary, not really. My claws were faster, sharper, more reliable in a fight. But I wrapped the blade in cloth and tucked it into my bag anyway. It felt symbolic. A reminder of where I'd come from. Who I used to be, and what I might need to become again. It was the kind of thing you brought because it meant something, even if it didn't make sense anymore. The zipper rasped shut just as Richard appeared in the doorway, casual as ever. He didn't say a word, just tossed something at me with that practiced nonchalance he always wore like armor. I caught it midair, reflexes kicking in before my brain caught up. 2 ID cards. A passport. My eyes scanned the name printed on each. Lucas Smith. I blinked, confused. Smith. Richard leaned against the doorframe, a knowing smirk curling one side of his mouth. Yeah. As of this morning, you're officially my adopted son. I stared at the documents again, then back at him. Wait, your last name is Smith. He laughed, a short, sharp sound more amused than genuine. Hell no. But, Smith, is the blandest, most forgettable name on the planet. You try looking up Richard and Lucas Smith, see what you find. It'll be an avalanche of suburban dads, middle school coaches, and guys who do their own taxes. I snorted, despite myself. That's actually smart. Richard gave a satisfied nod and turned away like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. My hand tightened around the passport, a strange weight settling in my chest. Not nerves, at least not exactly. It was something deeper. Heavier. Like the moment had more gravity than I was prepared for. I slipped the documents into an inner pocket of my bag, right over my heart. It felt like the final knot in a thread that had been pulling tighter for years. Outside, the car was already running. Richard sat behind the wheel, that familiar mask of grumpy patience on his face, the one he wore whenever he wanted you to think he didn't care, even though he did. But I couldn't leave just yet. There was one more thing I had to do. Emily stood on the porch, arms crossed, back straight. The early morning sunlight caught in her silver hair, making it gleam like woven moonlight. She looked almost regal, like a queen in a comfortable robe. When I stepped up to her, she didn't say anything at first. She just opened her arms. I stepped into the hug, and she pulled me close with a strength that caught me off guard. "You've grown into a fine young man," she murmured against my shoulder. "Whatever happens, I need you to know I'm proud of you." My throat tightened. My eyes stung, and I hated that they did. Emily wasn't one for soft words or warm sentiments. She didn't hand out affection lightly. When she did say something like that, it mattered more than I could ever explain. I clung to her, maybe longer than I should have. "I'll be back before you even realize I'm gone." She pulled back slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. Her smile was crooked, but her gaze was steady. "You'd better," she said, voice dry. "If you keep me waiting, I'll kill you myself." That made me laugh, even as I wiped at my eyes. I gave her one final squeeze and turned away before either of us could say anything else. I was walking away from the only real home I'd ever known. 2 days later, we stood at the edge of a forgotten forest, in front of a cave that didn't want to be found. There was no sound, no wind rustling through the trees, no birdsong, no crunch of underbrush. Just the heavy, oppressive silence of something ancient and wrong. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like the world was holding its breath. The cave mouth loomed ahead, dark and yawning. I took a step forward. And hit something invisible. I staggered back, instinctively reaching out with my hand. The air shimmered, almost imperceptibly, like heat rising from pavement. But it wasn't heat I felt, it was force, pushing me back like a hand pressed flat against my chest. "A barrier," I muttered. "Mountain ash, and sigils. Strong ones." Richard nodded once. "You won't be able to cross it while it's active." I turned to him, frowning. "What's inside? Why all this?" He stared at the cave, his eyes shadowed by memory. "You remember what I told you about hunters and shapeshifters? That were nature's immune system." I nodded, slow and cautious. "Then tell me, what do you call it when part of the body turns against itself?" "Cancer," I said without thinking. "Exactly," he said, voice low. "A long time ago, I had a partner. He was a werewolf, like you. Strong. Loyal. Sharp as hell. We hunted side by side for decades." He paused, jaw clenching. "I made peace with aging. But he never could. He feared it, feared losing his edge. And fear, it opens doors." I knew what he meant before he even said it. "He let himself be corrupted," I murmured. Richard nodded grimly. "Started using the wrong kind of power. Drawing on things no one should touch. He fed off fear. Off death. And the worst part, he believed he was evolving. Thought he was becoming something greater. And you had to stop him." He looked at me then, something raw flickering in his eyes. "I tried. But I couldn't kill him. I wasn't strong enough. Or maybe I just didn't want to. He was my brother in all but blood. So you sealed him away." "I bound him with everything I had," Richard said. "Sigils, wards, ancient rites no one remembers anymore. Locked him in that cave, body and soul. He's still in there, untouched by time. Still waiting." I swallowed, my gaze drifting back to the darkness beyond the barrier. "Why now?" "Because I'm running out of time. My body's failing. My bones are old. And if he gets free." He didn't need to finish. "This is your test," he said. "The final one. He's got all my skills. More strength. He's a werewolf who embraced corruption and kept his prime. If he escapes, I can't stop him." His words landed like a weight in my chest. Not crushing, but grounding. I had been preparing for this moment for years. The training, the trials, the long nights spent aching and unsure, they'd all led to this. I wasn't a boy anymore. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid. I took a breath. Let it fill me. Let it steady the shaking in my hands and draw steel into my spine. Then I looked him in the eye. Do it. Richard studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. And raised his hand. Chapter 27 Monster. Chapter 27. The Monster in the Stone. Lucas's perspective. Richard stepped forward without hesitation, moving through the barrier as if it weren't there at all, like it was nothing more than smoke drifting through the air. His body passed cleanly, effortlessly, as though the ward didn't even notice him. I followed instinctively, my feet propelling me forward before I had time to think. But the moment I touched the threshold, everything changed. I slammed hard against something invisible, an unyielding wall of supernatural force that threw me back like I was no more than paper against the wind. Right. Of course. Hunters weren't affected by supernatural wards like these. Not the way the rest of us were. So I waited. Heart pounding. Muscles tight. Watching the barrier shimmer faintly in the dim light. Then, almost imperceptibly, there was a sound, a soft, cracking noise, like ice beginning to fracture, and then a brief flicker of dull silver shimmered across the entrance. The ward broke, shattered from the inside. I stepped in. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. It wasn't just cooler or denser, it felt ancient. Like something older than language lingered here, pressed into the very stones. The dampness wasn't just moisture, it was memory. Power. The air clung to my skin like strands of spider silk, whispering silent promises of pain and violence. Of death. Richard moved ahead of me, silent and steady, down a narrow corridor of chiseled stone. The tunnel spiraled deeper and deeper into the mountain's core, and every step felt like a descent not just into the earth, but into something darker. Something forgotten. And then we saw him. He lay atop a massive slab of stone, positioned like a king on a ruined throne, or a corpse in a tomb. Arms folded casually behind his head, as if he were just napping, not imprisoned. But he wasn't asleep. Not really. His body looked mostly human, but only at first glance. The illusion broke quickly. He was partially shifted. Claws tipped each finger, sharp and unmoving. His lips were curled slightly, revealing long, gleaming canines. Dark fur shadowed his jawline, tracing up his cheekbones like smoke. He looked young, no more than 30, if you only saw his face. But his presence told a different story. His presence screamed of time. Of blood. Of power buried so long, it had warped under pressure. Ah, the figure murmured without opening his eyes. His voice was gravel soaked in disdain. The coward returns. Come to finish what you should have finished years ago. Richard didn't so much as twitch. Yes, Henry. The name cut through the silence like a blade. And it worked. Henry opened his eyes. They weren't golden, like mine. Nor did they burn red, like an alpha. His eyes were blue, an unholy, glowing, frostbitten blue. Cold as death. And just as final. The color of murder. Of bloodshed without reason. Of innocence lost. He sat up slowly, stretching as though rising from a nap, his grin spreading wider with each second. His teeth were too sharp. Too clean. Too ready. All that talk about aging gracefully, he said, almost amused. And look at you now. You smell like rot, Richard. Like rusted steel and old regret. Or you even half the man you once were. Richard's response came quietly, almost peacefully. Time is cruel to us all. Not to me, Henry sneered. I thought killing you would be a challenge. I spent years imagining it, thinking of how sweet the fight would be. But now, you wouldn't even make it interesting. Richard didn't rise to the bait. He simply stepped to the side and pointed. You won't be fighting me. His hand moved toward me, steady and certain. It's him you should be worried about. Henry turned his gaze to me for the first time. And when he saw me, something changed. His grin curved upward, twisted and cruel. A kid. He let out a bark of laughter. This is your plan. The great and mighty Richard, reduced to throwing children at his problems. What's next? A troop of Girl Scouts. Still, Richard didn't flinch. You'd be wise not to underestimate him. He'll be the one to put you down. Henry's smile widened. But it didn't reach his eyes. 17 years, he said softly, voice dropping like the air before a storm. That's how long I've been rotting in this hole. You know how I kept track. I counted. Day in, day out. Every hour, every breath. And the only thing that kept me from going insane was imagining what I'd do when I finally walked out of here. What I'd do to you. Then his gaze snapped back to me. Sharper now. Hungrier. This is your one chance, kid. Run. Leave while you still have the legs to carry you. This is between me and him. I stepped forward. There was no hesitation. Power surged through me as my bones began to shift, reshape. Claws tore their way from my fingertips. Fangs pushed past my gums. My ears sharpened, senses sharpening with them. Muscles coiled and pulled taut like a bow drawn to its limit. The wolf in me didn't ask. It came roaring to the surface. No, I growled. You gave up your humanity a long time ago. You don't get to pretend you're the victim now. Henry stood, uncoiling from the slab with a grace that belied his size. He rose like a thunderstorm on the horizon, ominous, slow, full of violence, just waiting for an excuse. And he looked pleased. Good, he said simply. I was going to kill you anyway. He stepped forward, and the cave itself seemed to shudder at the weight of him. Not his body. His power. The fight hadn't started yet. But it was coming. And when it did, I would be the one to finish it. Chapter 28 Sparks. Chapter 28 Sparks in the Dark. Lucas's perspective. Henry moved. It happened in an instant, a sudden, primal surge, his body a blur slicing through the stale, heavy air of the cave. For a heartbeat, all I saw was the glint of his eyes and the ripple of muscle beneath his skin as he launched himself forward, a predator unleashed. Instinct took over. My body tensed, every muscle coiling like a spring about to snap. Training flooded my veins, every lesson, every fight. My senses sharpened, the world narrowing to the threat before me. But then, in that split second, I noticed something. His trajectory was off, just enough to matter, just enough to make my heart stutter in my chest. He wasn't coming for me. His momentum, though wild and fierce, angled subtly away from me, almost too faint to catch. But I saw it. I felt it in my bones. He was coming for Richard. A jolt of terror shot through me. I shouted, a raw, desperate sound that echoed off stone, and hurled myself forward with everything I had. Richard stood unmoving, a silent sentinel in the cave, his silhouette unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't even raise a hand in defense. He just stood there, calm and resolute, like a mountain bracing for a storm. And in that moment, I realized, he was trusting me. Trusting that I would protect him. That I wouldn't let him fall. I crashed into Henry midleap, our bodies colliding with a force that rattled my teeth. Claws flashed, teeth bared, snarls tearing from our throats. We tumbled across the rough stone floor, scraping skin, rolling in a tangled blur of violence and fury. Then, just as suddenly, we sprang apart, landing on opposite sides of the cave. His eyes burned with an unnatural blue fire, cold and hungry. Mine blazed gold, fierce and defiant. We didn't speak. Words were useless here. Everything we needed to say was written in the tension between us, in the way our bodies moved, in the way our eyes locked. We lunged at each other again, drawn together like magnets. The cave filled with the music of battle, the crack of bone against bone, the clash of claws like steel on steel, the scuff of feet on stone. Our breaths came sharp and ragged, filling the air with the scent of sweat and blood. Henry fought like a force of nature, every move fluid and deadly. He was older than me, stronger by far, and his experience showed in the way he anticipated my attacks, countered with brutal efficiency. He was relentless, a storm of muscle and rage. But I was faster. My reflexes were honed to a razor's edge, my mind a whirl of strategy and instinct. And I knew everything he knew. Every lesson Richard ever taught me was now a weapon I could use against Henry. I didn't just hold my ground, I pressed him back, step by step. Claw met claw, fist met jaw, and we blurred through the cave like shadows locked in a deadly dance. At one point, we broke apart, both panting, sweat and blood mingling on our skin. Henry grinned at me, lips curled back to show sharp teeth. Where the hell did you find this monster, Richard? He growled, voice rough with exertion. Richard didn't answer. He just watched us, eyes steady, face unreadable. But I saw something in his gaze, a flicker of pride, maybe, or hope. Henry's grin twisted into a sneer as he began to circle me, eyes never leaving mine. Too bad, he hissed, voice low and venomous. I'll kill him before he ever gets a chance to grow. He moved again, a blur, a feint toward Richard just like before. I reacted, lunging to intercept. It was a trap. His claws slashed across my side, deep and merciless, tearing through muscle and flesh as like it was paper. Pain exploded in my abdomen, white hot and blinding. My breath caught in my throat as blood poured down my side, thick and hot, spattering the cave floor. I staggered, the world tilting. Henry's grin widened, savage and triumphant. He pressed his advantage, raining blows on me, each one ringing through my bones. I tried to fight back, but the pain slowed me, dulled my reflexes. Every movement was agony. He drove me back, step by step, until my back hit the cold, unyielding stone of the cave wall. Trapped. Nowhere to go. Finished. But then, something shifted inside me. I stopped thinking like a fighter, stopped relying on just the moves Richard had taught me. I reached deeper, into the wild part of myself, the part that was more than human. As Henry reared back for a final, killing blow, I dropped low, my body shifting in a blur of fur and bone. Paws hit the ground, claws scraping stone. I darted under his swing, moving faster than thought. And then I bit. My jaws closed on his side, tearing through flesh and muscle. His howl echoed through the cave, raw and furious. I tasted his blood, hot, bitter, tainted with something foul. Henry staggered back, clutching his side, blood pouring from the wound. I shifted back and collapsed to my knees, panting, vision swimming. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of pain. But then I saw it, the wound on Henry's side knitting itself together, flesh and muscle weaving back as if time itself was reversing. The corruption inside him boiled, healing him faster than any natural werewolf could hope for. He wasn't even slowed. He looked at me with eyes full of cold fury, grabbed my head before I could react, and slammed it against the cave wall. Pain exploded in my skull, white and blinding. I hit the ground, limp and helpless. My ears rang, my vision blurred. Blood still oozed from my side, warm and sluggish. I couldn't move, could barely think. Henry loomed over me, a shadow of death. Don't worry, he sneered, voice dripping with malice. You're not dying yet. Not until you watch me rip Richard limb from limb. You'll die after I eat his heart in front of you. He turned away, stalking toward Richard with slow, deliberate steps. My breath rasped in my throat. I tried to move, to stand, but my body refused. Pain screamed through every nerve. I looked at Richard, desperate. He still hadn't moved. Still trusted me, even now. But I'd failed him. No. Not yet. Something flickered inside me, a tiny spark, fragile but real. I blinked, forcing my eyes to focus. Through the haze of blood and pain, I saw it, faint blue sparks, dancing between my claws, electric and alive. Not the corrupted blue of Henry's eyes, my blue, pure and defiant. The air around me buzzed, charged with possibility. And deep inside, something ancient and powerful stirred. Not yet. Not while I still had a spark. Chapter 29 Thunder. Chapter 29 Thunder. Lucas's perspective. I couldn't feel my legs. Or maybe I could, maybe the sensation was there, but it was so thoroughly drowned in agony that I couldn't separate pain from numbness. It was as if my entire lower body had been submerged in a river of fire, every muscle and nerve ending screaming in protest. My head was a drumbeat of pain, pounding in time with my racing heart. My vision pulsed at the edges, flickering with bursts of color and darkness, threatening to collapse into nothingness. My gut felt hollowed out, as though someone had scooped my insides away and filled the space with burning coals. But beneath all that, under the pain, beneath the exhaustion and agony, something else moved. Something I couldn't name or understand. It was a spark, a flicker of energy that seemed to dance just beneath my skin, most of all between my claws. It was alive, wild, and utterly unfamiliar. Yet, somehow, I knew it belonged to me. It was mine. I gritted my teeth, jaw aching, and pressed one trembling, clawed hand against the cold, unforgiving stone beneath me. The rough surface scraped my palm, drawing blood, but I barely felt it through the haze of agony. My muscles protested, tearing and stitching themselves back together as I forced myself to move. Every inch of my body screamed in defiance, but I pushed anyway. Get up. My legs buckled beneath me, threatening to collapse and send me crashing back to the ground. But I refused to give in. With a guttural growl, I forced myself upright, swaying unsteadily on trembling limbs. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each inhalation a battle. Every step forward was a war against my own body, but I fought on. My vision doubled, the world spinning around me, but I could still see him, Richard. And I could see Henry, too. Henry had already reached Richard. His arms were raised, claws gleaming with lethal intent, poised to strike. One blow, and the man who had saved me, who had trained me, who had become something like family to me, would be gone forever. But Richard wasn't defenseless. He moved with a speed and precision, flicking something small from his coat, a glass vial, no bigger than a thumb. It spun through the air in a perfect arc, catching the dim light of the cave, and shattered against Henry's chest. The moment the glass broke, a thick, choking purple mist erupted, enveloping Henry in a swirling cloud. Even from where I stood, the scent hit me, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. Wolfsbane. My lungs seized at the mere whiff of it, my spine locking rigid, my blood roaring in protest. Wolfsbane was death to us, poison in its purest form. Henry inhaled it fully, the mist curling into his mouth and nose. For the first time since I'd met him, Henry looked weak. His skin blanched, turning a sickly, ashen shade. His breath rattled in his chest, each exhale a struggle. His hands shook, claws trembling as if every nerve had been set on fire from within. He staggered, dropping to one knee, and in that moment, I saw death clinging to him like a shadowy cloak. But Henry refused to succumb. With a guttural, animalistic roar, he slammed his fist into his own chest, again and again, as if trying to beat the poison out of himself. His body convulsed, shuddering violently, and then he coughed, expelling thick clouds of purple mist from his lungs and nose, like smoke from a dying fire. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. He moved slower now, but his eyes burned with a rage that seemed to set the very air alight. He locked his gaze on Richard, teeth bared in a snarl, every muscle coiled and ready to kill. But before he could take a single step toward Richard, I moved. There was no time to think, no time to breathe or hesitate. Instinct took over. The world blurred around me, the wind howling in my ears as I launched myself forward. My claws extended, sharp and deadly, forged from the raw fury and desperation that burned inside me. I struck. My right claw plunged into Henry's back, slicing through flesh, muscle, and bone. I could feel the resistance, feel the struggle as I pushed deeper, searching for the beating heart I knew was just out of reach. I pushed harder. But it wasn't enough. Henry turned his head, lips twisting into a grotesque smile, a mixture of laughter and a snarl. You missed, he spat, his voice thick with venom. But then, something changed. The spark inside me flared, growing into something far greater. It wasn't just a spark anymore. It was a storm. Lightning surged down my arm, wild and uncontrollable. It built in my core, gathering strength, and then erupted through my claw with the force of a god's wrath. The cave was suddenly filled with blinding blue light, searing and pure. Henry didn't scream. His body convulsed, every muscle seizing as the electricity tore through him. It was as if every cell in his body was being electrocuted, not just by lightning, but by my very soul. The bolt found his heart, and it didn't just kill him, it unmade him. Every corrupted drop of blood turned to ash, burning away the darkness that had claimed him. And then, silence. Henry's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The stench of scorched corruption hung heavy in the air, a final testament to the battle that had just ended. It was over. I pulled my claw free, stumbling as my strength left me. The world tilted, spinning out of control. The electricity vanished, leaving me empty and drained. My knees hit the stone, hard, and my breath caught in my throat. Everything faded to black. But as I fell, I felt something new. Not pain. Not fear. Not even pride. Just a quiet, undeniable truth. That power, it came from me. And I knew, even as darkness claimed me, that it wasn't finished yet. Chapter 30 Ash. Chapter 30 Fire and Ash. Lucas's perspective. I came back to consciousness slowly, as if surfacing from beneath deep, dark water. The first thing I noticed was the crackle, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Fire. Alive, breathing, whispering through dry wood. Its light danced across the stone ceiling above me, casting long shadows like ghosts at play. The ceiling was smooth, worn down by time and nature, dappled with the golden flicker of flame. I blinked a few times, confused by the warmth on my skin, the way the light moved. My thoughts felt sluggish, disjointed. But then I began to remember. The fight. The pain. The cold edge of death, sinking deep into my belly. And yet, I felt fine. Better than fine, actually. I pushed myself upright, somehow surprised by the absence of pain. My hands roamed over my body, expecting resistance, expecting the dull throb of wounds freshly closed, but I found none. Not even a scar. The gaping injury I'd suffered had vanished completely. Like it had never happened. My body felt whole, healed, restored. But the hollowness inside told a different story. My stomach twisted and groaned like something feral, an insatiable animal gnashing its teeth. Healing from my wounds had left me drained, starving. I hadn't even moved, and yet I felt like I'd just run a marathon uphill in full armor. Then I heard movement. A shift of weight. Something heavy dropped to my chest with a dull thud, making me flinch before I realized it wasn't a threat. A bag. I looked up. Richard stood a few feet away, his silhouette half lit by the fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. He didn't look at me. Eat, he said simply, the word clipped and devoid of ceremony. He returned to what he was doing, arranging wood, methodically, carefully, building something wide and deliberate at the center of the cave floor. A pyre. I unzipped the bag and was hit with the scent of salt, protein, and something sweet. It was a soldier's ration, beef jerky, energy bars, trail mix, dried fruit, and little green cubes marked energy chews. All of it engineered to deliver calories in the smallest, most efficient packages. I didn't hesitate. I just tore into it, tearing through plastic and foil like a man possessed. The food disappeared into me faster than I could register it. Each bite was a jolt of life, a necessary violence against the emptiness inside me. I wasn't eating for comfort or pleasure, I was fueling a machine that had been completely run dry. I could have eaten everything twice over and still wanted more. Richard didn't comment. He just worked in silence, the firelight catching on the edge of his jaw, his hands steady as he stacked the final logs. When I'd finally eaten enough to feel human again, I got to my feet. My legs were shaky, but they held. My body no longer screamed for sustenance, though a cheeseburger the size of my head still wouldn't have gone unappreciated. I walked toward him slowly, the last strip of jerky hanging loosely from my hand. And then I saw it. Henry. He was already lying atop the pyre. His body had been arranged with care, arms crossed over his chest, his features still and calm. Peaceful, in a way that felt strange, foreign. Peace didn't belong here. Not after everything. I stopped beside Richard, standing just close enough to feel the heat of the fire and the weight of silence between us. We didn't speak. What could be said? No matter what Henry had become, no matter how far he'd fallen or how twisted he'd grown, he had once been someone important. Someone good. Richard's partner. His friend. Maybe more than that. Maybe a brother not by blood, but by battle. Time dragged on, heavy and dense. Finally, Richard broke the silence. He was a good man once, he said, not turning his head. His eyes remained locked on Henry, as though looking away would make it too real. Before all of this, helped more people than I could count. Saved lives. His voice was low and even, but I could hear the tremor underneath. Not weakness. Something else. Something harder to name. I didn't offer condolences. Words like I'm sorry felt useless here, thin and brittle against the weight of what he had lost. So I just stood there, beside him, as he reached into his pocket and struck a match. The flame flared to life with a hiss. He leaned in, touched it to the kindling beneath the body. A breath later, the fire took hold. The gasoline helped. Flames surged upward, greedy and unrelenting, wrapping around the logs, the cloth, the body. In seconds, the pyre blazed, hot, bright, alive in a way Henry no longer could be. The heat washed over us in waves, chasing away the chill that had settled in the cave. Shadows danced madly on the walls. The crackle of burning wood mingled with the hiss of evaporating flesh. Still, we didn't move. We bore witness. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, rising like a soul being carried into the sky. Ash floated, soft and weightless, settling on stone and skin like snow. An hour passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time didn't behave normally in the firelight. Eventually, the blaze died down, reduced to glowing embers and a bitter, clinging stench. Richard stepped forward and scattered a final handful of dirt over what remained. And just like that, it was done. No ceremony. No prayer. Just fire, smoke, and silence. We packed up without a word. Sleeping bag rolled tight. Gear hoisted. Boots laced. The process was automatic, practiced. But the silence between us wasn't empty, it was loaded, thick with the weight of grief and unfinished thoughts. The cave felt heavier on the way out, the air denser, like the stone itself remembered what had happened here. When we stepped into the open, the sky above was a slate of bruised purples and storm-gray clouds. The wind was colder, sharper. A world waiting to move forward, uncaring about what we left behind. That's when Richard finally spoke again. His voice was quieter now, but every word was sharp and deliberate. You know what you did wrong back there. I nodded slightly. I'd been waiting for this. I underestimated him, I admitted, keeping my eyes forward. Richard shook his head. That was part of it. But not the worst part. He glanced at me, his expression carved from granite. You forgot the most basic thing. No one fights fair when their life's on the line. Doesn't matter who they are. Even the good ones fight dirty when death's close. The corrupted. They'll do worse than that. They'll burn the whole world to stay alive. I didn't respond. What could I say? He kept walking, his boots crunching against the gravel path. A good hunter knows that. Prepares for it. Sees the next move before it comes. Plans for what's hiding behind the obvious. The thing you don't see coming until it's already got you by your throat. I thought of Henry. Of the fight. Of the moment I'd believed it was over, only to find it wasn't. Richard had seen it coming. How easily Richard had brought Henry to his knees with just a vial of wolfsbane. You're strong, Lucas, he said after a while. Stronger than I ever was. Stronger than most. But strength means nothing if you go charging into the dark without thinking. Power can't replace wisdom. I know, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Richard stopped, turning to face me. No, he said, holding my gaze. You don't. Not yet. But you will. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and kept walking, each step pulling us farther from the cave, from the fire, from what we'd left behind. Only smoke followed. But deep inside me, something had shifted. I could feel it, low and humming, like coal still hot beneath the ash. A crackling current beneath my skin, alive and waiting. This wasn't the end. This was just the spark. The beginning of something more. Chapter 31 Spark. Chapter 31. A Spark. Lucas's perspective. For a long time, the only sound was the steady hum of tires rolling over cracked asphalt, a quiet rhythm that almost lulled me into forgetting how much had changed. Richard sat behind the wheel, his posture calm but rigid, his hands locked in place at 10 and 2 like he was clinging to control, not just of the car, but of the silence between us. His eyes were locked on the horizon, where the sun had just disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving behind streaks of burnt orange and blood red smeared across the sky like an open wound. I sat beside him in the passenger seat, my body still, but my mind racing in 100 directions at once. Outside the window, trees blurred past in indistinct shapes, telephone poles ticking by like the seconds of a slow, heavy clock. But I wasn't really seeing any of it. My thoughts were still trapped in that cave, still surrounded by smoke and stone, still tasting the metallic tang of blood in the air, still feeling the electricity burn through me like I'd been split open and something else had taken over. Something in me had cracked wide open. Something had come out. Lightning. Real lightning. And Richard had seen it happen. He had watched it happen. I couldn't keep it in any longer. I had to know what he thought. What he knew. So finally, I broke the silence. Are we not going to talk about it? He didn't look at me. Didn't flinch or sigh or shift in his seat. But I saw it, the way his grip tightened on the steering wheel. Just a fraction. Just enough. That lightning that came out of me, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm, steady. Right before I blacked out, I saw your face. You looked shocked. And in all the time I've known you, Richard, I've never seen you look like that. He let out a breath. It was slow and heavy, like he was exhaling something that had been sitting in his lungs for years. It was more than just tired, it was burdened. I didn't bring it up, he said at last, his voice low and rough, because I don't have any answers for you. I nodded slowly, absorbing that. I hadn't expected a full explanation. Not really. But it didn't stop the storm of questions boiling under my skin, each one clawing for space in my brain. Why me? How? What was I? He glanced at me, just for a heartbeat, then turned his eyes back to the road. But if I were you, he added, voice dipped in warning, I wouldn't mention it to anyone else. I frowned. Why? His tone changed. It dropped into something quieter, more cautious. Like we weren't alone. Like the shadows in the car might be listening. You know how it is, he said. No matter who you are, shapeshifter, hunter, etc., it doesn't matter. The forces of nature still affect us. Fire burns. Cold freezes. We might heal, we might survive it, but it still hurts. Even the corrupted, even the monsters, they're not immune. I nodded. That much I already understood. The world didn't care what you were. Some things hurt everyone. But lightning, he continued, that's something else entirely. Lightning is worse. Far worse. No creature is immune to it. High-voltage weapons have been in the hunter arsenal for decades, tasers, shock nets, arc grenades. You name it. And they work. Doesn't matter how strong a shapeshifter is, or how twisted a corrupted creature becomes, lightning cuts through all of it. My breath caught as the memory returned, vivid, unshakable. The cave. The moment it happened. Henry, that smug monster of a man, his body seizing as the energy surged from my claws. How it wasn't just the power, it was the effect. Like nature itself had struck him down. I nodded with the new understanding that what happened back there wasn't just impossible. It was something else entirely. I stayed quiet after that. So did Richard. The silence returned, thicker than before, laced with unspoken things neither of us wanted to face yet. 2 days later, we finally reached the cabin. The moon was high, pale and ghostly behind thin clouds, casting a soft silver light over the trees. I should have been grateful for the shelter, the safety, the quiet, but I wasn't. I was too restless. My body ached with fatigue, but my nerves were lit like wires. That kind of tired where even blinking feels like too much, and yet sleep won't come no matter how badly you want it. I showered, ate a quiet dinner with Richard and Emily, climbed into bed, laid there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of answer. Then I heard them. Muffled voices coming from the kitchen. I closed my eyes, focused. My werewolf hearing sharpened like a blade. The distance between us disappeared. I could hear them like I was standing in the room. Richard's voice first. Tense. Hesitant. He didn't just kill Henry. He electrocuted him. Lightning, from his claws. Silence followed. Thick. Loaded. Then Emily spoke, soft but deliberate. There was once a bloodline. My breath caught in my throat. Emily continued, her voice wrapped in something old, like she wasn't just remembering, but summoning history. Werewolves. Yes, but different. Ancient. Their names been lost to time, buried by fear. Legends say they could wield lightning. Not manipulate it. Be it. Like it was part of their body, not some borrowed force. I've never heard of them, Richard said, sounding unsettled. You wouldn't have, Emily replied. The other shapeshifters, even other werewolves, they were terrified. Thought it was unnatural. Too powerful. So they did what cowards always do when faced with something they can't understand. They hunted them, Richard said, voice grim. Every last one, Emily confirmed. Wiped them out. Erased them. Not a trace left. Or so we thought. A long pause followed, deeper than the others. Then Richard said, barely above a whisper, looks like the bloodline isn't gone. I heard him exhale. I imagined him shaking his head. I always knew the kid was different, he said. But this is something else. He's not just gifted, Emily said, her voice harder now. He's something ancient. Something dangerous. Her footsteps moved, the sound of resolve. This cannot get out. Not to anyone. If the wrong people learn what Lucas is, it would put a target on his back, Richard finished, just for existing. They didn't say anything more. But I didn't need them to. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. My fingers twitched, and for a moment, just a breath, I felt it again. The spark. The crackle. Like something alive and ancient was curling beneath my skin. Still there. Still mine. But at what cost? Because whatever I was. Whatever I am. It's not just power. It's a secret. A legacy. A threat. Chapter 32 Echoes. Chapter 32. Echoes of the Forgotten. Richard's perspective. We stood at the crumbling threshold of the ruins, ancient, weathered stone swallowed whole by the vast and relentless South American jungle. The foliage pressed in on all sides, thick and suffocating, as if the very land itself was trying to smother the memories that lingered here. Vines had overtaken every inch of the structure, curling around the decaying archways like serpents of time, tightening their grip, slowly pulling it all back into the earth where it belonged, forgotten. Left to rot. Best left untouched. The air was oppressive, heavy with moisture, thick enough to choke on. Every breath felt like inhaling the scent of decay, old stone, damp roots, and something beneath it all that reeked of age and wrongness. Something that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Something that wanted to be left alone. It had been 4 years since we dealt with Henry, since that day in the cave that still visited me in my sleep. Lucas was 16 now. Taller than me. Broader in the shoulders. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't yet realize he had nothing left to prove. Smarter than I ever was at that age, maybe even smarter than me now, though I'd never admit that out loud. The boy had enough self-assurance to fuel 3 grown men and a wolf. He stood just ahead of me, looking toward the darkness that waited beyond the threshold. The way his eyes scanned it all, sharp, methodical, calculating, it was like watching a young predator assessing the terrain. He turned to me with a crooked smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, that same one he'd had since he was 10 and figured out how to lie convincingly. You sure about this, old man? He asked, eyebrows raised with playful mockery. Most retirement parties involve cake, balloons and bad coffee. Maybe a speech. Not spelunking into cursed ruins to deal with whatever horror that was locked away before Shakespeare was born. I let out a low grunt. Never pictured myself as the cake and speech type. He chuckled but quickly turned his gaze back to the darkness. That humor, it was a shield. Always had been. Lucas cracked jokes like a man drawing a sword, wielding them to keep the world, and its emotions, at bay. Especially when things got real. Thing like how much he hated the idea of this being our last hunt. I could see through it all. I'd taught him how to wear that mask. We stepped forward together, our boots meeting ancient stone that hadn't seen footsteps in decades, maybe centuries. The sound echoed down the corridor, a reminder of how alone we were here, how far we'd come, and how little stood between us and what lay ahead. Lucas adjusted his gloves with quiet precision. His posture shifted, his breathing slowed. He dropped into that stance I'd seen 100 times before, a quiet readiness. He didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. Without being told, he slipped ahead of me, naturally taking point. He didn't need me anymore. And that, more than anything, told me I'd done my job right. So, he said after a moment, casually disarming a hidden tripwire with a flick of his clawed hand, now that you've dragged me halfway across the continent and into something that smells worse than death, are you finally going to tell me what exactly we're walking into? I think I deserve a preview. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of memory pressing on my lungs. A long time ago, centuries back, there was a cult. One of the worst. Not just blood rituals and creepy chanting. These ones found a way to kill people and steal their vitality. Not just lives. Lifespans. Like tapping into the essence of someone's years and taking them for yourself. He turned slightly, face unreadable in the half-light. Like draining their life. Exactly. No one could stop them. So instead of wiping them out, the hunters sealed them in. Locked the whole nest underground and buried it. He arched an eyebrow. How long ago are we talking? About 500 years. Give or take. He let out a low whistle. And you think they're still alive? They took enough lives to buy themselves a lot of time, I said. It'd take a few more centuries to run out of that kind of time. Lucas didn't reply. He stopped before another trap, this one subtler. A sonic trigger, tuned to a frequency only enhanced ears could detect. A brutal little mechanism meant for creatures like him. He disarmed it like he was turning off a light. No wasted motion. No fear. God, he was good. How many are we dealing with? He asked, eyes scanning ahead. 13. Maybe 15. It's hard to know. Records from back then are murky. He rolled his shoulders, loosening the tension in his arms. Noted. And the seal was meant to keep them in, I said. Not keep us out. That's what the traps are for. He nodded and moved on, navigating the corridor like he belonged there. I followed a step behind, eyes not on the path but on him. He moved like a predator in familiar woods. He was everything I'd hoped he'd grow into. Precision balanced with power. Discipline wrapped around ferocity. A wolf's soul tempered by a surgeon's hands. Stealing life, he murmured as we walked. That doesn't sound that different from vampires. I groaned. How many times do I have to say it? Vampires don't exist. Stop watching that garbage you call television. Lucas chuckled, but he was clearly disappointed. Okay. Then what do they look like? No one's seen them in centuries, I said. But the old books, they say they look like hairless humanoid bats. Big. Pale. No wings. He grinned. Sure. But if they're pale, live underground, and drain life from people, come on. They're basically vampires. I gave him a sidelong look. You're impossible. His grin widened. The truth, one I didn't bother denying, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. The creatures we were about to face didn't sparkle or wear tuxedos, but they had survived off the lives of others. Fed on years. On vitality. On souls, maybe. And if the old books were even half-right, they hadn't just endured the centuries, they'd waded through them. Patient. Hungry. We continued deeper into the ruins. The walls closed in, the light faded. The air turned colder. Staler. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature, it came from history. From power. From things that should have died long ago but didn't. Lucas didn't hesitate. Not once. Not for a second. He moved like he belonged here. Like this world was his. And maybe it was. Mine was fading. My time was slipping past like sand in a cracked hourglass. But before I let go, before I stepped away from this life completely, I had one last task. One last evil to put to rest. Chapter 33 Flower. Chapter 33. The Flower of Death. Richard's perspective. The stone beneath my boots felt like ice, rough, worn by centuries, and full of ghosts. Each footfall echoed in the crumbling passage like a reluctant heartbeat. The air inside these ruins wasn't just stale, it was ancient, thick with the weight of everything that had died here and never quite left. It whispered against the walls like a dying breath, and with every step deeper into the heart of this forgotten tomb, it felt like something was watching, remembering. Lucas and I finally came to a halt before the entrance to the final chamber, a massive arch of cracked, moss-clung stone that towered over us like the open jaws of something long dead. There were no iron bars or heavy chains keeping intruders out. No lock, no visible trap. Instead, there was something far more effective. A seal. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, at least not mine. But I could feel it, an invisible wall of pressure pressing inward, not against my body, but against my very soul. A sensation like gravity being turned sideways. Not magic in the way people think of it, not wands and incantations and glowing runes, but something older, primal. It had the feel of something etched in blood, sealed in sacrifice, bound with the last breath of desperate people who'd known what true monsters were. It hummed beneath my skin like a storm rolling in just over the horizon, low, deep, and hungry. Next to me, Lucas tilted his head slightly, his golden eyes flaring to life like twin suns. His werewolf senses kicked in, revealing things I couldn't begin to perceive. Ancient sigils, layers upon layers of them, painted across the threshold like a spiderweb of warnings. Symbols that didn't just stop the bad things. They stopped the things the bad things feared. He let out a long whistle, his breath fogging in the cold air. This seal is really something, he muttered, awe in his voice. You weren't exaggerating. It doesn't even register us as threats, but it sure as hell isn't letting those vampire wannabes out. I gave a curt nod. Obviously. The hunters who were here before us didn't pull this off on their own. They had help. No one wanted those things getting loose. Lucas stepped closer, narrowing his glowing eyes at the flickering sigils pulsing within the stone-like veins of faint light. Nice to know if we screw this up, the seal will still do its job. Small comfort, I guess. I slid my pack from my shoulders and lowered it to the ground with deliberate care. The straps creaked slightly, and the sound echoed far too loudly in the stillness. Unzipping the main pouch, I began laying out the gear I'd prepared for this exact moment. Every piece had a purpose. No extras. No luxuries. Each one of those cultists, I said as I worked, was as powerful as a monstrous corrupted creature. Strong. Fast. Unnatural. There are at least 12 of them down here. Lucas gave a low whistle, this one less impressed and more grim. Obviously the hunters back then couldn't take them down. Not all of them. They had to do the next best thing, seal the whole nest shut like a nuclear waste site and hope time did the rest. But it didn't. Lucas didn't flinch. Didn't look scared. If anything, the little bastard looked excited. His eyes were alive with the kind of reckless joy you only see in someone about to throw themselves into something suicidal and call it sport. That glint of wild anticipation, like he wasn't about to face soul-drinking ancient horrors but step into a ring and fight for a trophy. Even in the face of this, I couldn't help but smile. God, I'd miss this. I reached down into the hidden compartment of my pack and pulled out a small glass case, no bigger than a jewelry box. It was lined with protective velvet and inscribed with faintly glowing runes, precautions for the lethal thing inside. I popped the lid open. Inside, resting like a piece of frozen smoke, was a single flower. Delicate, pale blue, and impossibly soft-looking. It seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light, like mist caught in moonlight. It was beautiful in a way that didn't feel natural. The kind of beauty that made your skin crawl, like seeing a perfect smile on something that shouldn't have a mouth. Lucas's expression shifted. Eyes wide. Breath caught. Is that? Yeah, I said quietly. The flower of death. The most potent venom known to man. Even the scent smells like a funeral. He leaned in slightly, cautious but clearly fascinated. How the hell do you even have one? They're practically myths. I got it a long time ago, I said, carefully lifting the flower with gloved fingers. Been saving it. Figured I'd need it for something big. With a practiced motion, I crushed the flower in my palm. The petals turned soft, then liquefied, becoming a single thick drop of glowing blue venom that clung to my glove like living mercury. I took 10 of my silver arrowheads, each one painstakingly carved with binding runes, each one tempered in blessed water, and dipped their tips into the venom. As the blue liquid touched the metal, the sigils ignited briefly, pulsing with pale fire, then vanished into the steel as the venom was absorbed. Now, each arrow carried death in its purest form. Only 10. That was all I could make. All I'd ever have. Lucas watched in silence, his usual snark momentarily forgotten. Then, finally, so, what about me? I looked up from my work and shrugged. Only had the one flower. And besides, you've got lightning. You don't need this. Lucas frowned. Still. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I can't just zap them like I'm Thor. I've got limits. I smirked. You trying to guilt one of these out of me? He raised an eyebrow. Depends. Is it working? I chuckled and held up an arrow, knocking it to my bow. It glowed faintly, humming with that quiet promise of absolute silence. Seniority has its perks, kid. He snorted. Old men and their hoarding habits. I didn't answer. I just smiled. We stood in silence for a long moment, both of us facing the arch and the seal that guarded it. Beyond that barrier, horrors older than kingdoms waited. Creatures that had drunk from the soul and danced in nightmares. This wasn't just another hunt. It wasn't a mission. This was the end of something. For me, maybe everything. And I was ready. Chapter 34 Sound. Chapter 34 Sound and Silence. Richard's perspective. Before we go in, I said, my voice low, stopping just short of the ancient seal etched into the floor, there's something you need to know. Lucas paused beside me, still and quiet. The air was tense, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The old records didn't pull punches, I continued. They weren't vague, not about this. These cultists, they aren't just fanatics. They're monsters, literal monsters. Fast beyond belief. Stronger than anything once human should be. And they're hearing. I shook my head. Sharp enough to pick up the flutter of a moth's wings from across a chamber. Even breathing wrong could give us away. Lucas didn't flinch. He looked at me with that same calm detachment he always wore, as if I'd just told him the weather might turn cloudy. So I can't count on you to pick them off from a distance like usual. I gave him a crooked smile, equal parts grim and reluctant. Not unless I want every one of them on me in an instant. One arrow's all it'd take to break the silence, and bring hell crashing down on my head. He cracked his knuckles slowly, methodically. A faint glimmer stirred behind his eyes, blue light, electric and alive. Then I'll go loud, he said, voice like steel sliding from a sheath. I'll engage first, draw their attention. You take the shots when their backs are turned. I didn't like it. Every instinct screamed against using him as bait. But it was the best we had. The only thing that gave us a chance. I gave him a nod, sharp and reluctant. Watch yourself. He smirked. Always. Then he stepped across the seal without hesitation. We passed through the barrier, an invisible veil, ancient and cold. It rippled around us like smoke, brushing against skin and bone. And suddenly, we were inside. The air within was thick, dense with age, decay, and something older still. Something unnatural. A scent like damp stone and dried blood clung to every breath. The chamber yawned open around us, vast and crumbling. Towering stone columns, cracked and worn, rose like the broken ribs of a dead god. Above us, the ceiling was lost to shadows. And nestled in the dark, curled in corners and clustered around the fallen, lay the cultists. 16 in total. Each one over 7 feet tall. They might have once resembled humans in shape, but nothing about them was truly human anymore. Skin pale and taut, as if stretched too tight over their twisted forms. Hairless. Lanky. Muscles coiled and lean beneath skin like old parchment. Their heads were elongated, almost animalistic, and filled with teeth, far too many teeth for any natural mouth. Their ears were long, narrow, and constantly twitching, even in sleep. Bat-like. But darker. More cruel. Wrong, in a way you feel before you see. They appeared asleep. But the moment we crossed the threshold, their ears twitched in unison. Like they'd heard the faintest shift in air. One by one, they stirred, heads lifting, eyes opening. And suddenly, every gaze in the room was turned toward us. Lucas didn't wait. He took a single step forward, and roared. It wasn't just a shout. It was a war cry, raw, primal, deafening. A sound that shattered the silence like a hammer through glass. It echoed through the stone like thunder tearing through a mountain. And then everything exploded. I moved instantly, instinct carrying me behind a crumbled column for cover. Climbing fast, I reached a broken ledge above the fray. Drew my bow. Nocked an arrow. Waited. They surged toward Lucas in a blur of pale limbs and claws, far faster than I'd expected, even after all the warnings. One moment they were crouched like statues, and the next they were moving with speed that felt impossible. My body tensed. Even prepared, even expecting it, I nearly froze. They were faster than anything I'd seen before. But Lucas. He moved like he'd been born for it. The first cultist lunged, its claw aimed to tear out his throat. Lucas dipped low, twisted, and countered in a flash. His clawed hand slashed upward through the cultist's throat, lightning sparking from his fingertips. It wasn't just a strike, it was surgical. Precision wrapped in raw power. The creature spasmed violently and dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Dead before it hit the ground. I exhaled. Loosed 2 arrows. They streaked through the chamber like twin bolts of blue fire. Silent but deadly. Both hit their marks. 2 cultists dropped without a sound, twitching as the venom did its work. No cries. No flailing. Just convulsions, and then stillness. Lucas was already deep in the swarm. 13 remained, circling him, striking with razor claws and gnashing teeth. But he moved like the eye of a storm, calm, focused, deadly. He didn't just use lightning. He was lightning. It crackled through him, coiling along his limbs, almost illuminating the veins beneath his skin. Every motion amplified, refined. He moved faster than thought, reacting before attacks even landed. Electricity heightened everything, reflexes, perception, muscle response. He was in perfect sync with it. Another cultist lunged. Lucas ducked, spun, and drove his clawed hand through its chest. Lightning exploded outward in a jagged burst of blue-white fire. The creature seized and collapsed. That made 4. I tracked another cultist with my bow, drew back, and let the string hum. 5. Then, all at once, everything stopped. The remaining 11 cultists froze mid-attack. Their ears twitched violently. And suddenly, without warning, they turned as one. Not toward Lucas. Toward me. I didn't even have time to curse properly. Damn it, I breathed, already moving, already scrambling from my perch. I dropped behind the ledge, feet hitting stone, and ran, putting as much distance between us as I could in seconds. But I knew it wasn't going to be enough. Not against creatures who could hear a heartbeat from across a battlefield. Not when they were this fast. Behind me, I heard Lucas shout. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it carried power, rage, fury. Because this fight, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. Chapter 35 Myth. Chapter 35, The myth becomes real. Richard's perspective. The ancient ruins were collapsing all around me, the air thick with centuries of dust and the sharp tang of fear. Every step I took sent loose stones skittering across the cracked floor, their echoes bouncing off the broken pillars and shattered archways like the relentless ticking of a doomsday clock. Each breath I drew was ragged, a harsh rasp in my ears, reminding me with cruel clarity that time was running out, faster than my old body could keep up. I moved as quickly as I could, slipping through the long shadows cast by the sunlight filtering through the ruined ceiling. The stone columns loomed like silent sentinels, half swallowed by the creeping vines of ages past. I weaved between them, dodging heaps of ancient rubble, doing my best to stay one step ahead. But my pursuers were not merely fast, they were utterly relentless. 11 of them now, their numbers have fallen, but that did little to stop them. They shrieked and howled, their cries echoing off the stones like the death throes of beasts, their clawed hands raking at the air, hungry for my flesh. Despite the ache in my joints and the heaviness in my limbs, I refused to give in. Age had slowed me, yes, but it hadn't broken me. Not yet. I still had fight left in me. I pivoted sharply around a crumbling wall, my back pressed to the cool stone as I drew an arrow from my quiver. With a practiced motion, I knocked it, drew the string taut, and let it fly. The arrow found its mark with a sickening thud, burying itself deep in the eye socket of the nearest cultist. The creature dropped without a sound. I drew again, my fingers moving on instinct, and sent another arrow into the chest of a second pursuer, a perfect shot, right where a human heart would be. The cultist convulsed violently, its mouth open in a silent scream, before collapsing in a cloud of dust. But the others still didn't falter. Their pace only quickened, their hunger sharpened by the deaths of their kin. I could feel my strength ebbing, my breaths coming shorter and sharper, my vision narrowing at the edges. I was running out of time, and out of options. They were gaining on me now, their monstrous forms blurring as they closed in. My knees screamed in protest, my lungs burned with every gasp, but I pressed on. I had to. There was no other choice. I needed to buy just a little more time. Because Lucas was coming. I could feel it in my bones, as sure as I felt the pain in my hip and the blood on my hands. I just had to hold on. Just a little longer. Then, in the space of a single heartbeat, they were upon me. I dropped my bow, letting it clatter to the stones, and drew my dagger, a silver blade, etched with runes and sigils meant to destroy and banish. It was small, but quick, perfect for fighting in close quarters. I fought like a cornered animal, every move fueled by desperation and the hard-earned instincts of 1,000 battles. I ducked beneath a swinging claw, slashed at the tendons of another's leg, spun on my heels and shoved a cultist into a teetering column. The stone groaned and then collapsed, burying the creature beneath tons of ancient masonry. 8 left. I fought with everything I had, every trick, every ounce of training, every scrap of experience I'd gathered over a lifetime. My muscles screamed, my joints ached, but I didn't stop. Then, inevitably, came the mistake. One of them lunged low, its claws aiming for my leg. I twisted, barely dodging, but my foot caught on a chunk of rubble and I went down hard. Pain exploded through my hip, sharp and blinding, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it. A second cultist was already on top of me. Its claws slashed down, cutting deep into my side and pinning me to the cold stone floor. I gasped, the world spinning, my hand reaching for my dagger, but it was knocked aside, clattering out of reach. And then I saw him. Lucas. Charging through ruins from the far side, his eyes wide with terror and determination, his mouth open in a silent shout. But he was too far away. Too late. The cultists sensed him too. 8 of them turned as one, their needle-like teeth bared in wicked grins, their claws raised in anticipation. One of them lifted its hand, ready to finish me off. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. And then the world changed. It wasn't a sound that shattered the air, it was a force, a presence, a tidal wave of something ancient and unstoppable. It wasn't wind, or heat, or lightning, but something deeper, older, more primal. The very air seemed to pulse, vibrating with raw power. The cultists froze mid-attack, their claws suspended in the air, their shrieks cut off as if the world itself had silenced them. Time seemed to stop. I forced my eyes open, and I felt it, a presence so immense it pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked past the cultists, and I saw him. Lucas. But he was no longer just a boy, no longer the prodigy I'd tried to protect. His eyes glowed a deep, impossible red, not with anger, not with pain, but with something far greater. Authority. This was not the power that was passed down, or the stolen strength of a usurper. This was something pure, something earned. Power born of integrity, of will, of the kind of strength that could only come from within. A true alpha. My breath caught in my throat. The myth, the story we'd all whispered about, the legend we'd dismissed as impossible, stood before me, real and undeniable. The cultists trembled, paralyzed by the weight of his presence. I lay there, bleeding, my body broken, but it wasn't pain that overwhelmed me. It was awe. Lucas had done it. The myth had become flesh. And its name was Lucas. Chapter 36 Storm. Chapter 36 Leaves in the Storm. Richard's perspective. The atmosphere around us didn't merely change, it transformed into a violent tempest. The very air seemed to howl with a ferocity that set every nerve on edge, as if nature itself was warning of the chaos to come. Then, Lucas moved. But this movement was unlike anything I had ever witnessed before. It wasn't the hurried, desperate sprint of a man or even the primal rush of a werewolf in battle. No, this was something altogether different, something far more terrifying and inspiring. He didn't run or dash across the room. Instead, he vanished as if swallowed by the shadows themselves, disappearing from sight in an instant. One moment, I was surrounded by 8 cultists, grotesque, twisted figures with claws dripping with dark ichor and jaws stretched wide in snarls. These were not mere men, they were monsters, abominations born from stolen life and dark rituals, their presence suffocating the chamber with menace. And then, in the blink of an eye, carnage erupted. He reappeared behind the first cultist, and before the creature could even turn, Lucas's claws sliced through its midsection. The sound was wet and final, a body torn as easily as parchment. Blood sprayed the stones, and the cultist's lifeless form crumpled, its death so swift it could barely register what had happened. The remaining cultists barely had time to react. The second one lunged at him with a screech, claws outstretched, but Lucas caught it effortlessly midair. With a twist, he spun the cultist around, using its momentum against it. Muscle and bone tore apart under his grip, fragments scattering across the floor like debris in a hurricane. The force of the motion sent a shockwave through the chamber, rattling loose dust from the ceiling. His eyes, glowing a fierce red, locked onto the third cultist with unyielding focus. Without moving his feet, he flicked his wrist, and arcs of crackling lightning surged from his claws, piercing the cultist's chest, illuminating the chamber in a flash. The smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the air as the creature convulsed, then collapsed in a smoking heap. A fourth cultist lunged from the side, claws poised to rake across Lucas's back. But Lucas ducked, impossibly fast, and in one fluid motion, wrapped his arm around its throat. He lifted the creature and slammed it down onto the stone floor with a deafening crunch. The impact was so forceful that the stone cracked beneath them. The cultist's body went limp, its neck at an unnatural angle. A primal roar erupted from Lucas's throat, shaking the chamber as if the very foundations trembled under his power. The cultists tried to regroup, but it was a futile gesture. Two of them charged in tandem, foolishly believing their numbers could overwhelm him. Lucas spun like a cyclone of wrath, his claws flashing with deadly precision, lightning trailing every movement. The cultists' attacks met nothing but air and, in return, their bodies were shredded, collapsing in a heap. The final three cultists didn't even dare to attack. They turned and ran, stumbling over the bodies of their fallen comrades. Lucas did not pursue them. He simply moved with a terrifying grace and lethal efficiency, and they perished without a sound. It was effortless. Silent. Swift. Silence fell by the time the last body hit the cold stone floor, broken only by the echo of heavy breathing and the soft patter of dust settling through the sunlight. The floor was littered with the remains of the cultists, their once menacing forms reduced to stillness. The air crackled with the fading energy of Lucas's power, and the chamber, moments after a scene of slaughter, was now a testament to his unrestrained might. And standing in the very center of it all was Lucas. His chest rose and fell steadily, his shoulders squared with unyielding strength. Though his eyes remained a fierce red, their glow had dimmed slightly, replaced by a burning resolve that radiated from his very being. This was the boy I had raised. The pup I had trained through countless trials. He was the alpha this world did not yet realize it desperately needed. I exhaled deeply, suddenly aware that I had been holding my breath the entire time. Lucas turned to face me, the blood and ash clinging to his form dissipating like mist in the morning sun. "Richard," he said, his voice low but steady, filled with a calm authority that steadied my shaking heart. Without hesitation, he ran to my side. He knelt beside me, concern etching deep lines across his face. His claws retracted as he placed a firm hand on my shoulder, and I felt a subtle current pass between us, his instincts sharpening, his senses scanning me thoroughly. "You're okay," he said, his voice a soothing balm. "We're done. It's over." I managed a small, weary smile. "For you, it's just beginning." He helped me sit up, steadying me with a strength that belied his youth. Then I noticed it. A flicker in his eyes, a shadow of worry that sharpened into something more acute. He looked down at my side, where the wound still bled faintly. Then back up at me, his gaze searching. "Why aren't you healing?" he asked, voice tight with concern. I said nothing. No words were necessary. We both understood the grim truth. The claw that had pinned me had struck too deep, too true. The damage took what little time I had left. And this time, my body could not fix itself. Chapter 37 Ashes. Chapter 37 Ashes and Silence. Lucas's perspective. "We just have to stop the bleeding," I said, dropping to my knees beside him. My hands hovered over his wound, already crackling with faint, desperate arcs of lightning. They trembled, as if they understood what my heart refused to accept. "Then I'll take you to Emily. She'll fix you up. She always does." I pressed my hand against the wound, forcing myself to ignore the heat radiating from his broken body, the slick warmth of blood spilling through my fingers. Too fast. Too much. Too dark. The wound wasn't closing. No matter how much pressure I put on it, it was like trying to plug a hole in the ocean. "Don't," Richard said, voice quiet, so quiet. But there wasn't pain in it. Not fear either. Just resignation. Like someone settling into the inevitable. "It's no use." Then he slowly turned his arm, his left forearm, so I could see it. And I did. I saw it. I froze. His hunter's mark. Or what little remained of it. Once, it had been something to be feared and respected. A mark of purpose, of legacy, of battles won and horrors endured. Etched in ancient lines and bound with primal magic, it had wrapped around his arm like a crown of vines, thorned and regal. Alive with power. Now, it was barely more than a memory. The runes were ghostly. Faded. Hollow outlines of what they once were. As I watched, one of those delicate lines flickered, like a dying ember, and vanished. My breath caught. My pulse stopped. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no. It's been fading for months," Richard said. His voice was steady, like he was commenting on the weather. Calm. Detached. Too calm. I couldn't speak. Couldn't look away from his arm. My throat tightened like a noose. When I became the true alpha, I felt unstoppable. I never felt so powerful. The world had bent at my feet. I moved like lightning. I brought down horrors with my hands. But now, here in this crumbling ruin, beneath blood-soaked stone and a sky choked with clouds, I couldn't save the man who raised me. I should have told you, he murmured, glancing at the ceiling, or maybe something far beyond it. But you had more important things to deal with. And me. I had my pride. A dry cough escaped him. Just one. But blood painted his lips, dark and final. This life, it gives us a lot, he said. Purpose. Strength. A reason to keep moving forward, even when everything else falls apart. His eyes found mine again. But it takes, too. It doesn't ask. It just takes. A piece here. A piece there. Until there's nothing left. I nodded, because I didn't trust myself to speak. The truth in his words hurt too much. I had a wife, he said after a moment, and the words felt like an old secret, finally set free. Before I was just a hunter. She was the brightest thing in my life. She didn't just walk into a room, she lit it up. And when she died, that light left me. I didn't know how to go on. So I lit other fires instead. Small ones. Ones I could control. His hand lifted weakly and rested against my shoulder. It was barely a touch, like the last breath of a breeze. This, he said, voice almost a whisper. This is better than dying in some bed, wasting away while you pretend it doesn't hurt to watch me rot. I couldn't have stood that. I'd rather go like this, knowing you're ready. That you don't need me anymore. Tears blurred the edges of my vision, turned the world into water and flame. Don't say that, I rasped, voice barely holding together. It's true, he said. You've surpassed me, Lucas. In every way that matters. I gave you everything I had, and you still found more. Found yourself. His fingers fumbled at his coat pocket, and after a moment, he pulled out a small cloth pouch. Old, carefully sealed. I knew what it was the moment I saw it, he always carried it with him. His wife's ashes. The last piece of the light he'd once lost. Burn me, he said, placing it into my shaking hands. And bury me with her. I held it like it might break, my hands trembling like brittle leaves in winter wind. Live, Lucas, he said. Live in a way I couldn't. Don't follow the darkness into its depths just because you know how. Don't let it hollow you out the way it did me. Be more. I promise, I whispered, voice cracking, breaking under the weight of everything I couldn't say. He smiled. Not the grin of a warrior. Not the sharp smirk of a man who'd faced monsters and won. Just a quiet, tired smile. Crooked and worn. Real. And then, with a final breath, the light in his eyes dimmed. And was gone. Just like that. The silence that followed swallowed everything. The chamber, the battle, my heart. There were no howls. No morning bells. Just silence. He was gone. The strongest man I had ever known, gone. I carried him from the ruins in my arms. Not as a hunter. Not as a warrior. But as a son. A few hundred paces beyond the shattered stone, beneath the dense arms of old trees, where sunlight still dared to shine through the leaves, I found a quiet place. And there, I built the pyre. Not with sigils. Not with some ritual. With my own hands. I lit it with my claws. The fire caught instantly. It rose high, roaring to life as if the forest itself understood what was being given to the flame. He burned like a star, like something holy. His life, his stories, his pain, all of it curling upward in smoke and light. I stood there, motionless, as the blaze devoured the body but not the memory. I saw flashes, him teaching me to fight, to move, to survive. His laughter. His anger. His pride. And when only ash remained, I knelt beside the pyre, and with hands gentler than they'd ever been in battle, I gathered every piece. I placed it in the pouch. Silently. Reverently. Then I stood, and I turned north. Towards home. To keep a promise. Chapter 38 Grief. Chapter 38. Grief. Lucas's perspective. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Richard's car as I rolled slowly down the familiar path leading to the cabin, our cabin. Or rather, what used to be ours. This place had once been both a battlefield and a refuge. It had held our arguments, our laughter, our scars, and our silences. Now, as the car crept to a halt beneath the tall, swaying trees, it felt like something else entirely. It felt empty. No ghosts haunted it. Not exactly. But the air itself seemed thinner, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with absence. I turned off the engine, and the gentle ticking of the cooling metal filled the silence. I sat there for a moment, staring ahead through the windshield, hands still clenched around the steering wheel as if letting go would somehow let everything go. But eventually, I stepped out into the cool afternoon air. The breeze stirred the leaves above me, soft and respectful, as though even nature had chosen to tread lightly today. I approached the cabin slowly, my footsteps muffled by the moss and pine needles scattered across the ground. The wooden steps groaned beneath my weight as I climbed them, the sound startling in the stillness. I hesitated with my hand on the door, breathing in the scent of old wood and earth. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to find Emily already inside. She stood in the kitchen, just as she had 1,000 times before, holding a steaming mug of tea in both hands. Her gaze lifted the moment I entered, and for a brief heartbeat, we simply looked at each other. No words passed between us. She saw my face, and that was enough. Her expression softened. Her lips parted like she might say something, but then she didn't. She didn't need to. Instead, she crossed the space between us in just a few quick steps and wrapped her arms around me. She hugged me tight, and it shattered something in me. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how rigid I'd become. How much effort I'd been putting into holding myself together. The moment she touched me, my body seized, like a machine locking up, and then, piece by piece, it began to break open. I gripped the back of her sweater like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth, and for the first time since lighting Richard's pyre, I let the grief rise. I didn't let go of the small cloth pouch hidden deep in my coat pocket. Or of the memories, sharp-edged and relentless, that had carved themselves into my chest. But I did let go of the pressure. The relentless, suffocating weight I'd been carrying in silence. Grief hit me like a wave, massive and merciless, and I didn't have the strength to resist it anymore. Emily said nothing at first. She just held me the way someone holds something fragile and broken, gently, but firmly enough to keep the pieces from falling apart. She rubbed my back in slow circles, the same way she had when I was a boy and nightmares stole my sleep. Eventually, she spoke. Her voice was low, nearly a whisper, but it wavered with emotion she didn't try to hide. I know it hurts right now, she said, her breath catching slightly. More than you think you can bear. But I promise, Lucas, I promise, it will get easier. I buried my face in her shoulder and nodded. Words were beyond me. She didn't ask for them. Come on, she murmured, her hand brushing my arm. Let's go. And I went. We left the cabin behind, stepping out into the hush of the woods. The forest welcomed us with a kind of sacred silence. Sunlight filtered down through the canopy, casting fractured beams of gold across the undergrowth, like light through the stained glass of some vast, ancient cathedral. We walked in silence, our steps soft over pine needles and soil. The further we went, the more the world seemed to fall away. No roads, no houses, no people. Just us, and the trees, and the memory of the man we had come to honor. Eventually, we came to a small clearing I'd never seen before. At its center stood a tree, tall, old, weather-beaten. Its trunk was white and rough, bark curling like old parchment. Thick roots burst through the ground, gnarled and sprawling like the fingers of something ancient and wise. There, Emily said, nodding toward the base of the tree. That's where he wanted to be. Her voice was steady, but reverent, as if speaking in a sacred place. I dropped to my knees, and the cloth pouch, so small, so deceptively light, suddenly felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever held. With trembling hands, I dug into the soft earth, the smell of soil rising around me. Then, carefully, I placed the ashes into the hollow I'd made, his, and hers. Together again. I covered them slowly, pressing the dirt back over with the flat of my palm. When it was done, I sat back on my heels, staring at the mound I'd made. My chest ached in a way I couldn't put into words. Emily knelt beside me. I loved him, she said quietly. He was like a younger brother to me. Gods, he could be infuriating, stubborn, reckless, always had to have the last word. She gave a soft laugh, more breath than sound. Her hand came up to wipe at her eyes. But I loved him. I didn't speak. She didn't need me to. After a moment, she reached into her coat and pulled something from the inner pocket. A small object rested in the center of her open palm, catching the filtered light. The ring. Richard's ring. Silver. Unadorned, save for the single dark gemstone set in the center, a deep, opaque black that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. I remembered the way he used to fidget with it when he was thinking. The way he told me, once, that it had belonged to his father, and his grandfather before that. He wanted you to have this, Emily said softly. I stared at it, my heart pounding. My fingers curled into my palms. It didn't feel right. Not really. Taking it felt like accepting something I hadn't earned, a legacy, a lineage. It felt like stepping into shoes far too large. But I reached out anyway. I took the ring, my hand closing around the cool metal. And when I slid it onto my finger, it fit as though it had been waiting for me. Emily stood then, her eyes on the tree. I remained where I was, sitting on the forest floor, hand clenched tight around the band of silver and stone. I'll make sure he's remembered, I said, my voice barely audible. Above us, the leaves stirred gently in the breeze. Not loud, not harsh, just enough to let us know we'd been heard. And all around us, the forest held its breath. Chapter 39 Hidden Room. Chapter 39 The Hidden Room. Lucas's perspective. The door creaked open with a subtle, reluctant click, as if even it hesitated to let us in. Richard's apartment greeted us in familiar silence. It looked almost exactly as I remembered, unchanged by time, untouched by chaos, neat, sterile, purposeful. The walls were bare, blank canvases broken only by the occasional nail or hook. The furniture was minimal and carefully arranged. Nothing looked worn out, but nothing looked lived in either. The kitchen was spotless. No dishes in the sink. No lingering scent of food or coffee. Just an empty counter and an unopened bottle of water sitting on the table like it had been placed there in case someone visited but never was. The couch was plain, low-backed, and rigid, practical, functional, the opposite of inviting. Everything about the place spoke of a man who had shaped his life around efficiency. No clutter. No frills. And yet, oddly enough, it wasn't entirely cold. There was a strange, quiet warmth woven into the stillness. The kind of warmth that didn't come from material things, but from memories that still lingered in the air, refusing to fade. But there was one thing, just one, that stood out. One detail that felt utterly out of place in the otherwise utilitarian space. The photographs. They were everywhere. Lining the walls, arranged with exacting symmetry on shelves, standing upright in carefully chosen frames, each one clean, dust-free, as if they'd been tended to with care even after Richard was gone. There were no fingerprints, no smudges on the glass. Just frozen moments, captured in ink and memory. There was a photo of Richard's wife, bathed in sunlight, laughing as if she had no idea how rare that kind of joy would become. Another of Emily and Richard, their arms wrapped around each other, mid-laugh, genuine, unposed, real. I spotted one of myself, much younger, still awkward and too small for the training dagger I held with both hands like it was something sacred. Another showed me again, older this time, with a bloodied face and a broken grin after my first solo hunt. I remember that day, how proud he'd been, even though he hadn't said it. And then the one I couldn't stop staring at. The three of us, standing in front of the cabin. Years ago. Before everything changed. I stood in front of those memories longer than I meant to. Longer than I should have. The air around me felt heavier the more I looked. Every frame held a story. Every image carried a kind of invisible weight, pressing down on my chest with something between longing and guilt. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Swallowed hard against the ache building behind my ribs and started doing what I'd come here to do. I began packing the photos, slowly and carefully. Each one I wrapped in cloth, folding it like it might break from too much pressure. One by one, I slid them into the box. These weren't just tokens of a life well lived. They were proof, undeniable evidence, that Richard had been more than a hunter. That he had been a father, a husband, a mentor. A man who had loved and been loved in return. Emily watched quietly from behind me. She didn't say a word, but I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken truth that we hadn't come here just to mourn. This wasn't about grieving. This was about gathering what was left of him. What remained of his legacy. We moved toward the bedroom next. Like the rest of the apartment, it was bare to the point of feeling almost temporary. A single bed with a tightly drawn sheet. A nightstand with no drawer pulls. No pictures on the walls here. No books beside the bed. Not even a coat or a scarf hung on the wall hook. Except for the wall. To anyone else, it would have seemed perfectly ordinary. A solid expanse of painted plaster. But to my eyes, my sharpened, werewolf eyes, it shimmered ever so faintly. A shimmer not visible to humans. A veil, a spell, almost undetectable unless you knew to look for it. It was subtle, cleverly crafted, hidden in plain sight. I stepped closer and spoke the password. Aster. The word left my lips like an exhale, and almost instantly, the illusion began to melt away. There was a rush of warm air, like the breath of an unseen presence. And then, clear as daylight, a door appeared, metallined, solid, and very real, where there had been only a blank wall a second ago. I reached out, placed my hand on the handle, and pulled it open. Inside was the real Richard, the one I had known as a father figure. The man who taught me how to fight or how to survive. This was the Richard who had lived a life in the shadows. The hunter. The strategist. The protector of a world that had no idea it needed protecting. The hidden room was filled from wall to wall with the tools of a life spent battling darkness. Silver-edged weapons gleamed faintly beneath layers of protective magic. Enchanted knives rested in display cases etched with runes. Bundles of arrows and bolts sat neatly in rows, each fletched with colored threads and laced with sigils. I spotted vials filled with mountain ash, bottled wolfsbane, herbs that reeked of old magic and danger, some of which I couldn't even identify by scent. There were scrolls, maps, handwritten notes detailing rituals and runes. Files stacked neatly, filled with observations on supernatural patterns, creature behavior, and ancient lore. And in the center of it all, like the beating heart of his secret world, sat his old laptop, worn, dented, familiar. I opened the bag I had brought with me. Inside were the bow and dagger I'd taken right after Richard passed, his signature weapons, the ones I couldn't bear to leave behind. I began carefully packing the rest, item by item. It wasn't fast work. Not because I was being slow, but because every piece I touched carried a memory. A story. An echo of him. I wasn't just packing gear. I was packing his life. His mission. Each time I slid something into the case, I felt the weight of what it meant. By the time I reached the final vial, I noticed Emily still standing at the entrance of the hidden room. She hadn't moved. Her arms were crossed, and her eyes were narrowed, thoughtful, focused, not on me, but on something else. What is it? I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted around the edges of the doorway, then down to the floor. Her nose twitched slightly, just enough to notice if you knew her well. Finally, she spoke. You do realize this room is sealed by a mountain ash barrier, right? I froze. I inhaled slowly. There it was. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The scent of mountain ash. A bitter, burned wood note buried beneath the scent of herbs and metal. I hadn't noticed it before. I'd walked straight through it. No pain. No resistance. Nothing. And that shouldn't have been possible. I turned slowly, processing what she'd just said. Mountain ash is supposed to repel supernatural creatures. It's one of the oldest defenses against our kind. Hunters use it and rely on it. It works. But it hadn't stopped me. I shouldn't have been able to walk through that, I murmured. Emily stepped closer, her expression unreadable. It seems, she said, her voice low and careful, that becoming a true alpha hasn't just made you stronger. It's changed you. I looked down at my hand. At the ring Richard had left me. It glinted in the dim light of the hidden room, catching a flash of something ancient, something deeper than magic. Then I looked back at the open doorway, at the enchantment I had passed through like it wasn't even there. What does it mean? I asked. Emily shook her head. We don't know yet, she said. But if mountain ash can't stop you anymore, we'll need to find out what else has changed. And how much? I nodded, saying nothing. Something inside me had shifted since the ruins. It wasn't just grief. Something deeper had taken root. I didn't know what it meant to be a true alpha, but I would find out soon enough. Chapter 40 One More Thing. Chapter 40. One More Thing. Lucas's perspective. With a soft breath and a whisper no human ear could catch, I sealed the hidden door behind us. The illusion shimmered briefly, like heat rising off summer pavement, before settling back into seamless stillness. To the untrained eye, it was just another stretch of dry wall. Smooth, unremarkable, and devoid of any hint that it could fold away like a curtain to reveal something far older, far more dangerous. I turned toward Emily, meaning to speak, but something snagged my senses before I could say a word. It hit me like a subtle spark, sharp and acrid, threading through the air with a metallic tang. A scent. Human, yes, but wrapped in something else. Something unnatural. Familiar in its way, but also wrong. New. Alarming. I froze, every nerve suddenly on high alert. We're not alone, I said, lowering my voice as my brow furrowed. Someone just entered the building. He's a hunter. I can smell the mark on him. Emily didn't react immediately. She just raised one carefully arched eyebrow and tilted her head slightly, like she was recalibrating a theory. You're sure? She asked, skeptical but not dismissive. The hunter's mark masks the hunter's scent almost completely once it's activated. I know, I said, keeping my tone quiet and even. That's what's strange. I've never smelled the mark itself before. Usually I could tell someone was a hunter by what they carried. Enchanted silver weapons, mountain ash, bits of sigil residue. Now it's like I can smell the mark itself. Like it's burning in the air, like ink, smoldering on parchment. Emily's eyes narrowed, her curiosity sharpening. Interesting, she murmured, not quite to me. I've never heard of creature being able to sense the mark. This true alpha thing is becoming more and more fascinating. There was something else behind her voice, a thread of something she didn't name. Fascination, yes, but maybe also fear. Or awe. Or both. Whatever it was, I didn't have time to dig into it. He's heading for the door, I said, already moving. That would be the man from the association, Emily replied. He called earlier, said he was coming to execute Richard's will. I told him we'd be here. I nodded once in silent acknowledgement and stepped toward the apartment entrance. My hand was just touching the doorknob when the knock came, a polite, precise rapping. I opened it. And immediately, every assumption I'd made collapsed. The man standing on the other side of the threshold wasn't what I expected, not in the slightest. No weapons. No air of threat. Just a neatly pressed black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that looked like it had been knotted with surgical precision. His dark hair was combed with such exactness it might have been lacquered in place. Thin, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He looked more like a banker or a tax attorney than a man who carried death in his veins. But the mark was there. Hidden just beneath the fabric of his left sleeve, I could sense it pulsing. Not visually, not yet, but the scent confirmed it. It buzzed faintly under the surface like static. It was powerful, unmistakable. Like ozone. Like iron. Like old, dried blood. Lucas, he said with a calm, affable smile. You look just like Richard said you would. It's good to finally meet you in person. I've heard quite a few stories. I shook his hand, firm but cautious. Hi. And you are? Jerry, he replied. Just Jerry. That was all he gave me. Just Jerry. The words lit up every alarm bell in my mind, 100 silent warnings flashing red. Nobody in this world was ever just anything. Not in our world, not anymore. But Emily didn't blink. She didn't even twitch. So I kept my thoughts to myself and followed her lead. He stepped inside smoothly, like he belonged there, and set down a large suitcase with a soft, deliberate thud. It was matte black, industrial looking, reinforced at the corners and secured with a triple lock mechanism. Richard's will was simple, Jerry said, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. He left everything to you, his car, this apartment, his accounts and stored funds, and the contents of this case. He carefully nudged the suitcase toward me with his hands. I stepped forward, resting my hand on the surface. It was cold, too cold for the room's temperature. Heavy, too, not just with weight but with intention. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever was inside this suitcase wasn't just valuable. It was meaningful. Jerry adjusted his sleeves and gave a small nod. Richard trusted you, Lucas. That wasn't something he did lightly. I tried to speak, but the words caught somewhere behind the sudden tightness in my throat. I settled for a small nod. He turned to Emily next, gave her a subtle, respectful incline of his head, then faced me again. His expression shifted slightly, just enough to make my spine go rigid. And there's one more thing, he said softly, slipping one hand inside his coat with the kind of measured care that kept me just shy of defensive. I didn't move. Not yet. But every instinct in me snapped into focus. My muscles coiled, ready. My hearing zeroed in on the rhythm of his pulse, the scrape of parchment. It was just paper. He drew out a sealed envelope, thick, yellowed slightly with age, and closed with a dark red wax seal stamped with Richard's personal sigil. This is for you, Jerry said, holding it out. And you alone. Richard left strict instructions. No witnesses. No copies. Your eyes only. I took it slowly, my fingers brushing the worn edges. The seal was intact, pressed by a hand I would never see again. My breath hitched slightly. Jerry gave me one last nod, stepped back toward the door, and paused just long enough to glance back once. I'll show myself out, he said, and disappeared down the hall with barely a sound. When the door clicked shut behind him, silence settled over the apartment like a shroud. I stood there, staring down at the suitcase by my feet. The envelope felt heavier than its weight should have allowed. It pressed against my palm like it had a heartbeat of its own. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt him again. Not just in memory, not just in grief, but here. In the room. Like he was waiting for me to open it.